31. New armor. I can work with that and you can drop the mister. From the holoscreen the man, Liam Cram said with a hint of relief and a smile forming. Max brought a chair and sat next to Grace waiting for her to respond to the barbaric-looking man. He seemed rational and all, but it didn't change the fact he looked like someone who would kill you after a long session of torture for the smallest of reasons. Liam didn't inspire trust in him, but judging only a book by its cover was illogical, and Max was aware of this. It didn't change the fact that it was the case, however, as this man was very much dangerous, extremely intelligent, competent, and unknown on every point. He reused the drone N5 to communicate in such a way it was compatible with a speaker and a camera on their side. In and of itself, it wasn't impossible to do. Those drones are made to be versatile, but doing it while at the last sighting. He was in medieval bronze armor told there was something else. And this man could modify and create electronic devices by unknown means. Either he did it all on his own from the ground itself, or was with others, but the second option, which was the more reasonable, was funnily enough not the right one. He needed to talk with Grace about this, even if he was certain she was aware of this. Since you asked multiple questions, I will answer some of them, as anyone would when learning of me, and trust is something we need. Oh, you know my name, but that's all I would say for now. What? I'm human, as far as I know, even if I'm breathing perfectly fine where I should not. How I don't know. I wish I did. And as you can deduce, I'm alone. Liam let out, his voice getting quiet, almost muted toward the end as he closed his eerie and ethereal metallic gray eyes and took a deep breath. Oh, shit, Max thought, instantly feeling like the worst piece of shit, seeing the man's body language changing for something that was but sadness and longing. The man was human. Grace on her side wasn't much better, even worse considering it was her the reason for this reaction. This was someone who had lost a lot and endured a lot, and it was but a fraction physically shown that her gut told her, making it even worse. She didn't know what he had lost or endured, but it didn't change that he did, and she was right. Losing absolutely everything was something even the strongest of men and women couldn't simply shrug off. He didn't lie. The xenobotanist thought with certainty. She was certain because it wasn't her first time seeing or talking to people that had gone through a lot, sadly. It wasn't acting on Liam's part, and it changed quite a bit on the possibility of why he was here, but it certainly seemed to be out of his scope of control. She herself is not exempt from such rules, even if she knew she was blessed compared to billions of others and was extremely lucky to be where she was without having suffered. War, famine, diseases, pollution, depression, and death were ever present on Earth, but to a lesser degree on Mars and the Moon because of their little human populations. Only the richest were exempt from those problems, living in obscenity and perversion. There were reasons Pandora was such a sought-after paradise and why the RDA held an iron grip on it. Now I suppose it is my turn to ask one. What is the date and time? Liam asked with his composure fully back in less than 2 seconds, as if nothing ever happened to begin with. His previous smile, almost too white smile, back on as well. The April 21st of the year 2154, and it is currently 9:56 p.m. and 54 seconds. Max answered on instinct to this question, before ending up confused, but it was short-lived as his mind caught up as to why such a question would be asked. And it was not pleasant. The man on the other side nodded pensively. Then he asked another one. Interesting. And how many drones were sent? And what was their purpose, if it isn't too much to ask? 8. 8 drones, of which 6 are completely out with only N5 in your possession, and N4 destroyed after it got your message carved on the bark of a young Octerus folliculus. The drone's objectives were to map the flora and to find you, a secondary objective that failed successfully. Might I add, this time Grace answered. To prove she was truthful, she showed her holodoblet to the camera, which also had a miniature map of the Great Plain showing the 2 remaining drones' location. The man nodded again before looking up, frowning slightly at the darkening sky of the dusk that was progressively getting filled with dark clouds. It was sadly time to go, as doing a call in the middle of the night was both dangerous and impractical. And the weather didn't bode to be pleasant either. I think this short FaceTime call may need to come to an end. The night and a thunderstorm are coming, Liam announced, not sounding the most pleased with this. Reluctant even, I reckon a time should be chosen to avoid this type of problem of me waiting for 5 fucking hours. Right? N5 was active for several hours. Grace thought, regretting having used her avatar today, as it would have given the 3 of them way more time to discuss. But she couldn't randomly change her timetable, She had responsibility, and answering Selfridge for such change wasn't exactly the definition of pleasant. Evidently, since I don't want to be discovered by others, it needs to be a moment where one of you, or you two, are not disturbed by others to not risk putting me at risk. He explained further, blunt and honest, a recurring factor with him, it seemed. There was a moment of thought and exchange between Grace and Max that consisted of them going over the wind. This lasted until Liam, enough of waiting for the two, was going to snap his finger in front of the microphone, but there was a bright flash of light from the sky. Grace, surprised by this, immediately began speaking. In 5 days at 9 p.m. should be possible *** crackboom. Max flinched at the loud sound of thunder over the microphone while Grace stopped mid-sentence, and immediately the screen turned black. Then the image flickered back with a distorted static sound, the face of a very annoyed Liam, that even with the quality of the flowery language receiving the weather didn't go unheard before it turned completely turning black. That was an interesting way to say goodbye. He should be fine. If he lived there, it won't be his first thunderstorm, Grace muttered merrily, slumping in her comfy chair, hand going to bring her mug to her lips, only ending disappointed by the lack of liquid life in it. It did go surprisingly better than I anticipated, and I think you need to follow his regime, my friend, she added snarkily, standing up yawning loudly. Max deadpanned her at this. The word better was very much the understatement of the millennia for a rational and civilized discussion with a being of alien origin unknown to humanity. And he might have reminded her that this amount of muscles wasn't ordinary by any means of the words, that this individual was surely genetically engineered, but she still might be right, and he might need to lose some weight. Blaming the lower gravity was an old excuse that didn't hold much value after years of use. Day 143. Liam was in his basement with a multi-purpose tool in and focused on his future helmet. Polishing a plate of titanium alloys, he just added to the front part of it a piece that had multiple layers. After the outermost one he was working on was a thinner titanium plate, hiding a layer of a non-Newtonian fluid made of polymer akin to Kevlar. Then another titanium plate followed by this same material, and another titanium plate. And it was one of the weakest parts of the helmet. Then the interesting part, an internal portion of the circuit that connected to his implant and 10 high-definition cameras that had a night vision and thermal sensors function switchable at will, all gave a nearly 360 degrees vision, in theory. Not full-blown 360 degrees, as this helmet didn't let him see through matter. It was element in energy by 5 of the same self-replenishing hydrogen batteries he used everywhere, and the new cables made of the big flying jellyfish tentacle graphite cores that had barely any energy loss due to heat with short distance and constant use. Logical considering it delivered a minimum of multiple thousand-volt worth of electricity for an extended period of time. Why it was this way could be put to the very minute amount of pandorium/unobtainium in their molecular structure. It was no superconductor at ambient temperature, however. It was still slightly worse than silver in conductivity, but he didn't have any silver adding that it could handle more heat than said metal. Why complain? Copper would work as well, but why cut corners on such important things? It's asking for problems. Back to the batteries. Sadly, it was still the hydrogen magnetic filter bone from the cave viper wolves that was used, but here it was sculpted to the shape needed, as they needed to be inconspicuous and malleable to a degree. He still couldn't make this very important component as of now. He didn't even understand it fully too, but that was more on the strange magnetic metal unknown property than anything else. The batteries were hidden and protected at the back and easily interchangeable for newly charged ones, and with a command could be ejected. Let's say the Viper Wolves population underground took a hit. The funniest or most depressing part was that he didn't even hunt them, and since running was not an option, with how hell-bent they are on finding and killing them was the only option. Knocking them unconscious was basically a death sentence too. It was an experimental helmet that used designs found in tech, the mech in particular, that consisted of being one with it as if it was an extension of your very being. Evidently, it was way simpler, modified to feet here, and worse in every aspect due to technical limitations and not vital at all for the rest of the armor to do its job properly. But a very important tool, all the same. Electricity or not, it will still protect him against most calibers of bullet. His compound bow could still fire arrows through it, so likely Gnostics should as well, but it greatly reduced damage in either case, and it was from a close distance in a perfectly controlled environment. So in a real-life scenario, it will be overall better. And in the first place, he wouldn't let himself be transformed into a porcupine. The front part could split open either to show his face completely or simply have two reinforced glass eyes slit that let him see. It was designed for complete protection, so even those eyes slit could be protected by another layer of titanium. Normally, it would remind him blind to the outside and exactly what the cameras are for. "Let's test it," Liam said with childlike excitement in his voice, a great contrast with its timbre. He was already wearing the interior most of the armor. A form-fitting bodysuit composed mostly out of nylon reinforced with an overall titanium chainmail, pretty much a reinforced scuba diving suit. Easy to put for him, and even easier to get out as he could simply store it in his inventory. And also comfy, as this point was just as important as anything else. Grabbing the helmet, he spun it to be rightly oriented and put it on. It was snug and perfectly fitted for him. The world turned dark. Then with a mental command, his implant thrummed. The filter in each side of the helmet activated, and he saw from everywhere around his head all at once. Filter that could be connected to modified regulators and a tank for potential aquatic use. It was very disorienting at first. A normal human brain didn't evolve to understand this kind of sensory overload, and that would have resulted in the individual having an epileptic fit before fainting or entering a more or less permanent comatose, or if unlucky, dying due to internal brain damage. But he was quite literally built to be able to do this. The survivor was different than the regular human. So that is why he knew he would be disoriented at first and at worst feeling lightheadedness or a headache with potential ear and eyes and nosebleed. And most of those symptoms will be after a long time of syncing with the helmet. He stayed still, and not even after half a minute, all started to feel normal. Too normal, in fact. Focusing on how in sync he was by using a microchip in the helmet for the purpose to treat and give real-time data to his implant of all the helmet systems, he noticed to his shock that it was nearly 100% in sync with his body and mind. He predicted it would be around 60 to 70% at most. He might have underestimated himself. And he could guess the only reason it wasn't 100% was because of the helmet's limitation. This meant there was barely any delay, that all camera data were sent to him, even if he didn't always fully focus on each. And why it felt so normal, natural, even like he just gained many new eyes, if comparatively worse than his real ones in all aspects, but the capacity to detect thermic shift and a better sense of sight in the dark. It was something to be happy about, that was certain, but it was strange it didn't go as calculated either way, and a point of study for later. That's still trippy as fuck. I can see my back and ass. I will need more time to get used to it, Liam said aloud, voice distorted and muffled by the helmet, making him soon even less friendly than usual. Maybe adding a microphone and speaker would prove useful as well. Opening the titanium visor, for lack of a better term, he could see normally again, but the input from the cameras was still there in the second seat. No one would be able to sneak up on him. Moving around for some time, he grinned. This was incredible. Walking up to a wood mannequin with a black and gray armor on, the rest of the sets he so eloquently called Titanium Seer V1 because of the helmet and that it was mostly made of titanium, exactly 17.365 kilograms, 38.3 lb, of it was put into it. Basically 50% of all his titanium. Putting on the armor, Liam clipped each piece with the bodysuit and with one another until he was fully armored. From boots, gauntlet, shoulder, arms, legs, abdomen, and chest. It was a black armor reminiscent of Riot and Flak from the game, taking the best of both worlds, but also one of their main defaults. It kept heat very well, but feeling a bit hot and bothered was better than feeling a lot dead. This problem, even if a small, ignorable one, could be fixed later down the line. And the armor itself could, and will be upgraded. Picking up a bulletproof vest that was next to it, he added it on top of the titanium chest plates with also an integrated bulletproof vest below. There never was enough protection. With the 40 kilograms, 88 pounds of armor on, he deactivated the helmet and jumped slightly before punching and punching the air a few times. He brought up his war scythe and did swings of all types, did multiple one-hand sit-up on both hands, backflip, all of this for a good half an hour to test how he felt in the armor, and his grin widened. Feel great, a bit hot, but great. Can't wait to test it tomorrow down there, because with all of this, I'm freaking poor. And it's 11:48 a.m. time to eat. Tartare or barbecue? Why not both? He thought, also happy to now have a clock and a calendar of incomplete thanks to Max. He could track the time now, having updated it after the meeting with the two scientists because, for the last few months, his implant showed nothing on that aspect. Normal after all, the implant can't magically know the time and date. My Patreon if you had to give me money and have chapters 1 have finished in advance. Patreon.com/user question mark U = 6042 4165. 32. Second FaceTime. Deep within one of the caves of the Great Plain, a black and gray armored humanoid figure could be seen weaving between black branches. Glowing purple particles flowed within the air, emitted by crystalline plants growing all around. 10 spots emitting a soft red light were all around its faceless head. The figure moved unperturbed and visibly unaware of what was above, a blood-red creature on 4 taloned legs, its pair of hooked front limbs waving in the air as it slowly and methodically towards its prey. Yet all of a sudden the armored figure spun backward, a complex metallic bow in his left hand appearing out of thin air that was immediately switched to the other hand. Then an arrow with a strangely shaped bronze head appeared in a similar magical fashion in the now empty hand. The next instant the arrow was clipped to the bow string. The string realized back and shot. The arrow flew over the 24 meters that separated the two in a second to embed itself deeply into the blood-red creature's chest, whose reaction was to emit a shrill screech of pain and anger. Then its body flashed brightly with a soft boom, and all of its action ceased before its legs gave out, and it fell limply, crashing with a loud thump right in front of the armored figure. A smell of burned flesh in the air. "Not this time around," Liam said, his gray eyes appearing as he lifted the facial armor plate that hid the reinforced glass eyes slit, and he carefully approached the downed slinger, switching his compound bow for his war scythe cleaver. The head wasn't dead. It was trying to crawl away from the body, in fact by using the strange flap of skin that looked like bunny ears but were wings and now used as improvised legs. The entire thing looked like the mix of a bunny, a mosquito, and a slug. Liam grabbed it by the proboscis, and in response, it emitted a squeal of either fear, anger, or something else he didn't know. "I wonder if you can be kept alive to have a safe supply of venom, or it can simply be frozen and keep its effect." He wondered aloud, observing the squirming and squealing head. He didn't feel any pity for it, as by all means it wouldn't have for him, and was on its way to shoot him. "Either way, you come back home with me," he added with a smirk, and at the same time in his left hand a small red dart filled with a tranquilizer composed of a cocktail of plants diluted in pure water manifested into existence from his inventory, and he stabbed the head with it. It froze, then squealed and squirmed harder than ever in a burst of panic, until the tranquilizer kicked in, and it became slower and more silent until it breathed calmly and stopped moving. "I hope I didn't just inject something that will kill it." "Well, that would mean dinner, and the dead body smells like cooked salmon. It would be good if it tasted the same, even if it's quite a freaky creature." "Creatures?" Liam thought as he carefully strapped the sleeping head on his back, a living backpack made of half of one of the apex land predators of the entirety of the moon. It was a mixture used to let your spirit open up and let the words of Iowa flow through your spirit. He got this from Tsumong, and this clearly was a hallucinogenic drug, one that was taken via injection. The Anurai used sharpened bone covered in the drug to then poke themselves with it, as they did not know needles. Other than that, in big enough quantities, it affects many creatures. Nasics included a more or less intense soporific effect, going from a sudden simple nap to eternal sleep, which pretty much means death. And funnily enough, in it there was the use of Stingbat's rotten venom glands. It was time to climb up either way. He collected a good 5 kilogram, 11 pounds, of raw titanium, which means the process to purify will reduce its mass by nearly 2/3, giving around 1.75 kilograms, 3.8 lb, of pure titanium. Less than half a kilogram of raw platinum. Same logic used here than for the titanium, 200 kilograms, for 41 lb, of raw heavy oil and other less important resource. An above average collect due to the relative shortness of the dive. At this point, 3 hours, 10 minutes, and 36 seconds with a non-important amount of lower units of time. He was here mostly to test his new armor, and the verdict was that having a 340 degrees sight, even if not the best in terms of detail, was a life-saving advantage. Literally. The rest of the armor was simply better in all points than the last one he had, and the only creature here he was perfectly aware that could go through bronze was unconscious on his back. though it didn't mean the proboscis couldn't still go through some of the more fragile joints of his armor and cause superficial wounds, but again, superficial for him didn't mean superficial for everyone else. And not having one of his lungs perforated a second time was always a plus in his book. The fact the area was rich in precious resources didn't mean there were tons upon tons of this precious metal on top of one another ready to be picked up. It was in pebbles, rocks, and boulders sprawled all around the giant floating stone made of pandorium/unobtainium. Cracking his neck, a satisfying loud popping sound was heard. He looked one last time at the body of the slinger. The wood shaft of the arrow was gone, completely splintered, and the arrowhead exploded inside, instantly killing the body with the heat, shockwaves, and shrapnel combined. Pointy sticks with explosive bits were scarily effective on fleshy beings. This one in particular, as it covers one weakness of the regular arrow. If it doesn't hit something vital like the heart or cause hemorrhage by cutting arteries, it won't kill quickly or kill at all compared to this one. Even if they hit the shoulder or the knee, having it blown off right after was a tad more problematic. It's a grenade attached to an arrow after all. The climb back was one of the easiest of the dozens he did. No viper wolves or stingbats attacked him, even when directly confronted with him. They ran as if their lives depended on it. A strange sight for sure for Liam. He was so used to being attacked by everything and anything rather than the contrary, and what should be normal was perceived as strange. But he had enough common sense to realize this. It was the slinger's head. It was the only factor that changed unless the viper wolves and stingbats, in particular, learned self-preservation in this short time frame. And it was understandable. They would be created by the slinger's smell, as he doubted any other factors were at play. Once he was on the surface, he hurried himself back to his base as a thunderstorm was coming, and the head needed to stay unconscious for ease of handling and transport. A few hours later, the slowly awakening head was in a steel cage itself, placed in an isolated room. Gladius behind that glared at it, something that promised death, pain, and murder, while the four tetrapterons on Liam's shoulders and head didn't act that much different. They didn't like it. Something Liam already anticipated, but could do nothing more than let them adapt. It was a problem, as in the future they will encounter a lot more different individuals, and having them calm would only help. There was also in the cage a bowl with raw meat and another with water. The proboscis was just to inject venom, as below were four-segment demonic-looking jaws, something like a lamprey's non-existent jaw, but worse, and that could extend outward to scrape meat and flesh alike. At least Liam assumed this was the case. This creature was strange. It has two neural cues at the base of its neck, the same as for the body, and surely how they connected together. It was a strange creature, and he would think of them as even stranger if he knew the two were related to one being the mother/father of the other. It was an interesting creature. He doubted he could tame it, even less now, and didn't particularly have the present need to. It's utterly defenseless, and its use didn't need it to be cooperative. That didn't mean he would treat it poorly. He wanted it to be alive and healthy after all, but that wasn't a pet or one of his tames. It's an insult to even compare them, as they were closer to family than anything else. He very much was aware they considered him as their father. He inadvertently got a viper wolf and stingbat's repellent, and that was what mattered. What was there to complain about? Things were going smoothly, too smoothly in fact, and that made Liam tense. A gut feeling told him the next few months will be unpleasant, but that didn't stop him from profiting a little from this time for now. As much as the future was important, if you don't know how to appreciate what is good in the present, what is the point? Too much of anything is bad after all. The next few days flew by until it was the time of the second FaceTime. Liam was pleased with the last, even if it was cut extremely short. Mostly because of who he got to talk to, and that they were reasonable, though the part where he had a moment of weakness wasn't, but that was life. He will need to get over it, and he did a pretty good job until now, but it might have proven advantageous as it made him more human to them. He didn't like manipulating others, but that won't stop him from doing so. And it wasn't truly that here, but gaining empathy. He abhorred having acted this way, but he preferred to lean over the possibility balance of his continual existence. He would take advantage of this. If he showed he was a true threat, he was damn sure Grace wouldn't hesitate to have him caged or worse eliminated. Being good didn't equate to being stupid. Even if not for herself, or Max, as well, just telling of his existence to the higher up of the local RDA would result in those two earlier problems. Destroying a helicopter? No problem if he took it by surprise, and it wasn't kilometers up in the sky. A squad of fully armed, and trained military? Manageable if he goes for the kill and plays dirty. But the two put together, and even worse, an entire army of them, even if small, without more advanced troops? No way he survived to tell the tale. His physical prowess didn't matter against a hail of rockets and bullets. His future actions literally depended on the competences and whims of those two individuals, even if they didn't realize it. This led to the present. Day 147 for Liam, or the April 26th of the Earth year 2154 at 8:55 p.m. Liam stretched on the seaside stone cliff, relaxing his muscles as he did so. He was wearing the same type of cloth as the first time, but in a different color. The shirt was more on the blue side due to the plant fibers color used, and this one glowed in the dark. As well as the same haircut and beard. It was annoying on several points to have them grow so fast, but that was infinitely better than being bald or beardless. He brought in the drone-turned phone, and a tripod out of his inventory. Placing the two in front of him, he turned in 5 on and waited. Unlike the last time, he waited only around 20 minutes. Good afternoon, Grace and Max. I suppose it doesn't bother you if I don't use your title. Liam greeted them with a courteous smile through the camera as he saw the two taking their seats, Grace looking pissed off about something. I'm sorry, Liam. As for the reason for us being late, let's say a greedy little fucker. And the doctor title is unnecessary, Grace said, visibly calming from what this greedy little fucker had told to anger her. You don't seem to particularly like him or her, Liam said with a lifted eyebrow. Him? And indeed, Parker Selfridge is not someone I particularly like at all. Nobody here really does, but me in particular. He is a businessman at heart. Something he lacks, and the one with the reins. She answered the unasked question of Liam, with venom dripping out of her every word. Max next to her side at that. Liam wondered how many times a day he must have this repeated, but formulated in different ways. But from the movie plot, well, he didn't remember a guy named like this, but this immediately put whoever this Selfridge was. He was now in Liam's radar to either ally with or to eliminate. I can't believe my first thought is to murder this man. And the fact I know I likely will have given a chance and a reason, Liam thought. As much as he wanted to be perturbed by this idea of killing a human, he wasn't. He told himself several times his survival came first and foremost. He understood that she was biased against this man, and for very good reasons. If the general idea of the movie was here. Speaking of that, it cemented the general idea of where he was in the supposed timeline if there was the paraplegic man yet before or around the start of the movie, which ultimately didn't give much, but that was still this. On another note, Grace and I have made a list of questions for you. Correction, saying a book's worth of questions might be a more appropriate term. Most being from Grace. Max corrected himself, chuckling and scratching his short, curly black hair in nervousness. Go on, so who's first to ask? Liam's words echoed, and the xenobiologist was the first to ask, anticipation and curiosity in her tone of voice. This question might seem intrusive because it is, but how did you manage to tame a duo of wild tetrapterons and train them? She asked, Liam not being stupid and having heard the terms before whistled, the sound loud and clear. Not even 4 seconds later, 2 tetrapterons arrived, one red and the other blue and purple. The hot-colored one landed on the man's head, and the cold-colored one on his right forearms. Each of their claws against his scalp and skin, but neither seemingly bothering him. You mean those guys, yeah? Well, I wouldn't say I got them grown up from the wild. Imprinting them before they even hatched is key. The local wildlife isn't very friendly to me, you see. The rest is self-evident. They are smart birds after all, he said, scratching Septon's head playfully, the alien bird cawing happily while its brother looked wronged by the lack of attention. Sadly, the man only had 2 arms. His words, while completely true, were incomplete, imprinting wild animals of Pandora even before birth. If eggs gave a good head start, but their natural instincts to kill the outsiders was extremely strong. As such, at best, it was stupid with the risk of injuries, and at worst, it was death. Grace could draw her own conclusion with those words by filling the gap herself or by asking more questions. My Patreon if you had to give me money and have chapters 1 have finished in advance. Patreon.com/user?mark_60424165. 33. Capitalism never changed. The call has gone up for several minutes already. Questions and answers flying from each side, such as what is the state of Earth asked by Liam. While most of the man's answers were mostly reserved and very cutthroat, something Grace and Max understood. Something Liam didn't even try to hide. Either he didn't know them and they didn't know him. Being frank here was good, necessary even. Lying about something that was going to be ultimately discovered was dangerous, but that didn't equate to revealing everything, such as his interdimensional origin. Something he couldn't even answer, and he didn't want to open this can of worms now either. He must gain their trust and gain allies, human or not, so lying was counterproductive. Liam, have you had any contact with Gnostics? They are tall blue humanoids with 4-digit, pointy ears and a tail. Grace asked while bringing up a holobullet with a picture of a female Gnostics with human characteristics looking oddly like Grace, and she was smiling with 3 other regular female Gnostics, 2 being teen, and the third a kid in front of the camera. Right? There was this in the movie where they controlled those human Gnostics hybrids by sleeping in those boxes. I wonder how it's done. Liam wondered briefly about the technology behind it, as it could simply be a simple brain chip to a full-blown psychic link. This technology was mostly possible thanks to a controversial RDA scientist back on Earth, Dr. Cordell Lovecraft, pioneer psionic researcher, having used all animals for his research. The Dark Dream Project, humans, criminals mostly, not being outside of the range of his experiment. It wasn't a bloodless or painless technology, but nobody outside of the Dr. Lover raft and a few high-placed individuals knew the extent of those 2 points. There was a question to answer, one that would have come. This wasn't trivial. His relationship with the Gnostics was very important. Closing his eyes for a long second, Liam spoke this time, not in English, to the immense shock of the scientists. Yes, I did a few times. He waited, letting his words set in with a smile forming. He nailed the pronunciation this time. AM still bad at the people's language, however. They are fascinating, some less welcoming than others, but very interesting. They call me the Lost Child. After this, he waited some more until the xenobotanist replied, shocked and delighted. Hungry to learn more. By Yuya. You are even better than some who spoke it for years. Pronunciation is nearly perfect. This is incredible. It changes everything. How did you learn the language? Did they teach you? What clan were they part of? Why such a title? What is the meaning behind it? How did your interaction with them go? Are you currently in contact with them? Max placed a hand on her shoulder, telling her to calm down before she started asking even more questions. It was Liam's turn after all. One of the rules that were set at the start was equal exchanges. To a degree, of course, his information was more or less precious to the individual in question. Max was more of a middleman here, truthfully. He was no expert in Gnostics culture or alien biology outside of avatars and humans' brains. He had an interest in Liam's brain, how it was made, etc., but that was not the place nor time, and to let the man enter a scanner more than 2 calls are necessary. That isn't a problem, Max. Yes, I learned the language thanks to an amiable wandering Gnostics with the same trade that we are doing. Knowledge for knowledge, but that is all I will say. For now, Liam said calmly. He didn't want to involve anyone else in this. To say it mildly, clusterfuck, and make it even worse. Grace nodded, calming herself down. This information opened many possibilities for the future of human Gnostics interactions, all needing Liam, as he was a third party to the conflict between Gnostics and the RDA. She could only hope she could convince him to help. From what little she learned, he wouldn't budge without very convincing arguments. And forcing him, even if she wouldn't do it either way, seemed to be the worst possible decision. The man was desperate and in depression to an unknown degree, and as such quite possibly mentally unstable. No, he just didn't show it. And betraying him will likely make him snap, and she was certain in no way would she survive. It was a gut feeling coming from her most primal instinct. He was superior to them, as confusing as it was, and also mixed with common sense. A discussion she had many times with Max for the last few days. This man wasn't normal, if man at all. A genetically engineered individual of unknown origin would be far from ordinary in all aspects imaginable. For explicable reasons, he was like this mentally, alone in an alien environment, and with the blade of the entire RDA, and so much more above his neck did this. If he were to have been discovered by someone less altruistic than them, his future wouldn't have been nice. She couldn't even begin to comprehend the amount of pressure and stress he must endure. He was aware of his situation. He clearly didn't want to be here, but he wasn't fared much better than anyone else she could think of in those conditions. The fact he learned the Gnostics language from a Gnostics means he was a good person, even if she was not as well versed in the many clans of the Great Plains. A general rule Na made after what the RDA had done and is doing is to be extremely wary of humans, and some are sometimes aggressive to the point of going for the kill without hesitation, such as the Omaticea. Liam speaking it to such a proficient degree showed he was taught extensively for at least months by the natives, and no Na teacher will bother teaching someone who is a monster or who couldn't show potential in their ways, or if they were forced and she seriously doubted, he could do the latter as strong as he looked. Nausicaa and Avatar simply didn't play in the same league as humans in that department. A fact she could attest. It was the difference between a full-grown adult and a regular child. I suppose it is my turn. I want to be sure. I have an idea of why the RDA is here, but again, I want to be sure. Why is it here? And also, since I answered one more, how powerful it's actually in the grand line as you clearly hate their guts? You're right. It would like to say the RDA is on Pandora to study the flora and fauna as well as learning from the Nausicaa, but that would be a lie. She halted, thinking of a polite way to put it while taking a big gulp out of a water bottle. The leading factor of it all is, I suppose you already guessed, resources such as unobtainium. We are simply here to be a pretty little eco-scientist team to the media back on Earth. It's a company that works for profit and only this. It needs a nice image, even if it's the most powerful independent company in the entirety of human history. From healthcare to the food and entertainment industry, most of the scientific research is not connected to any government. They control and find basically everything else under the sun. The sole reason Pandora isn't a rock void of life is a set of extraplanetary regulations set by the United Nations. Grace explained. She was furious, sad, disheartened, and so much more. She truly despised the RDA and what she gave in general information, for very good and valid reasons. But it's nothing new as a concept to him, only taken to the extreme. And it was good to know the UN still existed, but they wouldn't act much different from the RDA at his discovery. And he seriously doubted the one at the head of the RDA, if push came to shove, would bother to think twice before breaking some of the rules just for him, the UN not being exempt from this either. In fact, he was sure new laws would just be made for him. They make the rules, and he didn't know how different they are from the one he was used to, but they should be in any case way more corrupt. If the Earth is as bad as Max told him a few minutes earlier when he asked, and it should be even worse currently, it wasn't his Earth, but that didn't change that it was tragic. A dystopian world, one he was happy to not have been born on. The Moon and Mars colonies not faring that much better, exceptionally worse even from the little Max knew. Tragic but logical for Mars and the Moon to be worse than Earth in terms of habitability, as the not-so-blue planet anymore needed to be cracked open for the playing field to be even. He hated politics and politicians in general, but that didn't mean all were evil pieces of shit and worse scums of humanity, so to say. It's simply that the ratio of good and bad has always leaned toward the extremely bad end of the spectrum from any party, country, time, religion, and ideology. An aspect that must be even more pronounced here. Trusting that one, if he managed to contact one high-placed enough, will do something other than lie and deceive him for him to end up under a scalpel or in a white room to be tortured, or worse was pure unaltered madness and stupidity in its rawest form. There surely are exceptions, they always are, but that wasn't worth the risk to find them. He hated to be put in that corner. The RDA was a megacorp controlling nearly everything. Its influence over the entirety of humanity, but humans he couldn't trust except for a potential few. His own species. More precisely, the leaders were going to be his enemies. Something he already anticipated as he couldn't see any other alternative now. If the occasion of communicating presents itself, and it is safe, he will still try, but there weren't many ways out, and his life mattered more to him than anything else. And for the metal, makes sense they wanted this shit, is better than any superconductor known to humanity here. It's revolutionary. But can't they artificially synthesize it? I mean, it should be possible with enough research. I can already see several ways to go about it. You know, I'm idiotic. Monopoly over it. A fucking course. Milking things as much as possible even when there are other alternatives. Liam rationalized. He wanted to be angry, furious, but he only felt immense disappointment and disgust. That all sounds extremely bad, but I admit it's not surprising. At all, Liam said honestly, and both sided that. Any more questions you might have, Max Grace? It's getting dark on my side. There is not much time left unless I want it Sumra, reaping my gut out. This earned a snort from Grace at that, and a confused glance from the person spoken to before she explained what it Sumra was, a slinth, the fastest land predator of Pandora, and an extremely venomous animal that Gnostics use the venom of to coat their arrows. Yes, and saying the contrary would be the understatement of the century. But your safety is more important even if I don't doubt your self-defense capabilities, Grace said, disappointed by the overall shortness of the call, but greatly pleased by what was learned. That sums it up for today. When would you prefer our next rendezvous to be? Liam said, the red tetrapteron on his lap, waking easily reading the messages of Father through the link that it was soon the time to go home. I thought of a time, but the next few weeks will be very hectic for the entire base. New personnel is coming to the base directly from Earth. Some must already be in the stages of waking up from cryostasis. The only time Max and I have with certainty is May 6th, and for the time it's yours to decide, Liam. Some will be added under my care, and that will need my attention, Grace explained with a frown, almost upset. Not a particularly new sight with how many times she was incomprehensible with how many reasons she had to be. Ah, is the crippled guy arriving with this batch? Or it could be another totally different batch for all I know. Liam nodded in understanding while scratching Mary's belly, his mind going over what was said. Around 3 p.m., I suppose after this one in 10 days chances or there will be a long time of silence, right? This won't do. This won't do at all. Unacceptable even, the man said calmly, his left bandaged hand holding his chin with enough force to break a child's hand. I would like for you two to procure yourself with a device similar to those tablets you like to wave around or one that could be used as a phone, preferably inconspicuously. It is of little importance to me as long as it can send, treat, and recuperate data, as well as needing them to be new, disconnected from any of the RDA servers, or ever connected to those either. I want devices free of any externals interferences. I want them to be on a particular frequency of your choosing, but one and used, that doesn't risk getting found, and that you will give me next time, Liam explained, voice unwavering and a smirk gracing his roguish features. My Patreon if you now to give me money and have chapters 1 have finished in advance. Patreon.com/user U equals 60424165. 34. Third meeting with the natives. It has been 4 days since the call with the two scientists has passed, and Liam's daily life hasn't changed. Wake up, eat, work, play with his tames, work, eat, train, work, eat, train, eat, sleep, rinse, and repeat with the occasional moment where he scrubs himself clean and other necessities. In an underground room with weak lighting, a man in only a pair of worn-out pants could be seen, a long diagonal scar running along the defined muscles of his back, and a smaller scar on his right pectoral. And on, Liam muttered, his implant glowing brighter as he connected to the device on a stone table carved directly from the wall. It was a small induction forge powered by electricity produced from a generator on the ground. A machine he didn't have a direct engram of, but that didn't stop him from crafting one considering he knew of them and that the concept behind them was understood to him. And it was pretty basic. There still were trial and error, as he wanted the best possible from the available resource at his disposition, and this was the result. He couldn't do so many things at once. He was a very busy man after all. He had planned to add induction forges to the fabricator in miniaturized form and the future industrial forge. A forge he needed and wanted as it would let him melt all types of metal up to tungsten, purify them, do various alloys, and more not an exact copy from the engram, as there will be modifications where he sees fit. The copper coil didn't change outwardly, but Liam knew it was working with the soft hum of the forge and the constant feedback from its systems to his implant indicating the rapidly rising hertz. The number of times the current passed within the coil per second, rapidly passing from 0 kHz to 90 kHz and stop at 95 kHz. He took a crucible that had seen better days and placed a steel cylinder inside, before placing the whole, with the help of a tong, and the copper coil cooled down by extremely cold, demineralized ultra-pure water flowing within thanks to a pump at the back of the forge. In a matter of seconds, the metal started to glow a bright red, then shift to orange and settle on a bright yellow as it deformed due to its weight and its abrupt change from a solid state to a liquid one. Smiling at the positive result, Liam waited a little longer to then rapidly pick up the crucible with the tong to not have the pour tool melt, and he proceeded to carefully pour the molten steel into 3 prism-shaped ceramic molds. This is vastly superior in speed than my other forges, level of heat exponentially higher, with great ease, control, and precision. But only certain materials can be melted with it, and I can't really refine much with it. And it's portable, Could be useful in case of an emergency repair, he said matter-of-factly. All in all, pleased with this new addition. He didn't bother with this type of forge for producing his titanium and many of this metal's alloys, its lack of refining capabilities being at fault. Titanium, the way he wanted it to be useful, needed to be refined, a lengthy, time-consuming, and complex process, even more complicated with the sheer amount of carbon on this moon. Also, the reason why it is so pricey, even if it isn't as rare as gold or platinum. The induction forge could heat things well and fast, but forging was more, way more than this, and some metal to be useful needed to be treated differently, just like cooking, such as titanium, as otherwise it would be brittle. But titanium wasn't what he had in mind for now. Mentally commanding the device to increase the frequency to 150 kilohertz, this being basically equal to 2500 C degree, 4532 F degree, for whatever metal needed to be melted within. A clean crucible appeared in the palm of his left hand, and a millisecond after a thumb-sized nugget of raw pandorium/unobtainium. One of the purest he had, doing the same as for the steel, and nothing happened. He waited a few seconds, seconds that turned into half a minute, and still nothing. Frowning, he decided to progressively increase the frequency, such as increasing the temperature until it reached around 2900 C degree, 5252 F degree. Finally, lower than tungsten and way lower than element, but extremely hot to be used all the same. He thought, his earlier frown disappearing. His gray eyes locked onto the nugget of metal that was starting to glow a soft red to rapidly shift from orange to a bright yellow. Oh shit, this is bad. His eyes widened ever so slightly. As he got feedback that the hertz emitted by the coil suddenly went ballistic, he instantly shut down the forge, but that was of little use, as cracking with electricity and heat, the piece of metal glowed ever so brighter, turning almost pure white. His mind instantly caught up on what was likely going to happen, his body moving in perfect tandem with his mind, a thick hardwood plank as large and tall as he was manifested from his inventory in front of him. It covered his entire frame, and not even a few microseconds later, with a bang, the piece of metal exploded into more than a dozen small fragments, each at minimum 3 times hotter than lava, into the air at the speed of sound. The crucible didn't hold them, and neither did the copper coil, as it was shredded apart, the water flowing out in abandon. One fragment smashed into one of the bioluminescent mushrooms above, turning the room dark, as all others connected popped like balloons. For others flew all around, digging deeply into the wall. 2 more into the induction forge. Another one into the generator fuel tank, setting it ablaze in a small explosion, turning the room bright, and the 4 last embedded deeply into his makeshift shield. Shit, Liam swore as he let the shield go. Not waiting for the fire to get worse, he ran straight at it. And from his brightly glowing implant, moist dirt from earlier work this morning on his small farm above was poured down on the blazing fire while he held his breath. It isn't that the fume and gas would be mortal to him, but it smelled and tasted horrendous when it wasn't an intentional explosion. The effects were instantaneous, as the fire, while intense and bright, was small and couldn't resist its source of oxygen getting cut off and the temperature shock getting poured down on it, cutting all of its access to oxygen. A few seconds later, and nearly 100 kilos worth of dirt, and all the flames died. That didn't go as planned. Maybe putting the Pandorium into an artificial magnetic field wasn't the brightest of ideas, or it violently changed its polarity when entering fusion, or both. Or something else. He mumbled, looking down at the red-hot shard of the metal embedded into the wood plank. If he didn't react fast enough, this could have been in his head or chest. Mistakes were made and will not be repeated, but there weren't that many other options for him to learn about this metal. Asking the 2 scientists was, and still is, an option, but not the wisest one, since he did want their trust, and this metal is the main source of conflict between humans and Gnostics. Showing an interest in it this early was not good, even if he doesn't need hundreds upon hundreds of tons of it. And it wasn't even sure they knew about its intricacy, and not forgetting that it must be highly protected information, probably not even here. If it was, they likely wouldn't tell him. There needed to be some tact. At least I know at what temperatures needed for it to enter fusion, but that's the tip of the iceberg of what I need, and he paused, his eyes trailing over the destroyed induction forge and generator. Probably will need to fix you 2 as well. Day 155. A few hundred meters away from Liam and half of his titanium armor, the upper body part except helmet, because it was very hot today, and he was holding a roasted seasoned half-eaten stingbat's leg in his right hand. Taking the last few bites of it, he cracked it slightly, then threw it behind into the air. It was caught mid-fall by the glassy claws of Oxidant, who immediately flew atop the base's wall to gorge itself with the remaining scraps of meat still attached to the bone. When nothing remained, it used the top of the wall as leverage to crack open the bone with the earlier damage Liam had done and gorge itself onto the juicy bone marrow. While this was happening, Liam worked on the turret at his feet, a daily checkup to see if nothing was wrong, and also to reload them if necessary. It rarely ever happened, since having them constantly shoot whatever entered their radar was simply a waste of resources and dangerous, and having to reload them every day was a pain. At first, it was the case, but his training of their algorithms didn't stop after the drone incident. In fact, such accidents wouldn't happen anymore. He has a big enough digital database of the fauna to have targets put on, exterminate, and others on, spare the life, with a dozen other variables such as the presence of the pinging rings on his tames. He could also use them to shoot a target with his will if he was in a 100-meter, 328 feet, radius of the turret, not due to the turret's signal limitations, but because it required he mentally aim the turret if the target didn't correspond to the one put on, exterminate. And aiming like this was quite a bit more complicated when you don't have the turret or target in sight. He could also change their focus to a different target or stop them from firing. It was strange, addicting in a way to be able to wield technology as if it was an extension of his body, but again, it was only the technology he created specifically to be used by him this way. It was in no way magical, and these turrets didn't make him some kind of god or more resistant to a bullet to the head from a sniper kilometers away or orbital bombardment. Their main targets, shot after 10 seconds of wait to avoid wasted bullets, were viper wolves and slints as the main targets, and in some cases, if alone or in small group, stingbats. Herbivore being avoided, as for most, way bigger caliber bullets were necessary, and he didn't want to stampede. Herbivores are way more dangerous than carnivores in his opinion, at least in his current situation and from his first-day experiences. Having killing machines was fun and all, but if there weren't any fail-safe, this could lead to grievous consequences if some natives became too curious and tried to poke at it, or enter its 150 meters, for 82 feet, line of sight for a bit too long. Or the earlier case of stampeding. His walls, while they are strong, made of clay, stone, bones, and wood, still wouldn't hold much of a chance against hundreds of enraged, elephant-sized creatures. As if on cue, 3 dots entered his peripheral vision. He stopped all of what he was doing as his head snapped in the dot's direction. His pupils narrowed almost to the point one might think he had a grave case of meiosis. The 3 were farther down the plane, the bigger greenish-gray with 6 legs. He recognized it. It was a Poly, or in English a dire horse, not that he knew of this name in that language. The 2 other dots were smaller, thinner, and bluer. These were novice, 1 male and 1 female. Easily told differences by how one was less nude than the others. He wasn't surprised one of his Tetrapterodon had noticed a big clan arriving from quite a few days away by foot a few days ago, but he didn't truly pay more attention than necessary. And that mining was out when a clan arrived, and some areas became no zones too. He couldn't bother himself with every clan under the suns. If he investigated every Gnostics clan, big or small, that moved in the plains, he might as well abandon every other project he had and go play the hippie with them. Knowing their general migratory routes, where they are going, and how many they are good enough, that didn't mean he didn't search for more, but even with 8 pairs of eyes in the sky, he was far from being remotely omniscient. Frowning, he brought a spyglass from his inventory and looked through it. He recognized them. The 2 geniuses that thought going out in the middle of the night was a good idea. And they weren't far from another turret, but that wasn't a problem unless he seriously messed up the programming. And if it was the case, those 2 would have been long since dead. The consequences wouldn't be as light as the drone. What were those 2 teens' names again? Right, the boy is Maruk and the girl is Tati. Liam wondered, after a few seconds of internal debate, whether or not going to talk to them was worth it. But something made it all the clearer. The answer was yes. Tati was walking towards the turret, calling over her boyfriend, as he supposed it was what they were, or at least the Gnostics equivalent. Maruk approached, dragging the reluctant dire horse by its leash, and the 2 Gnostics marveled at the turret, turning all around it, sometimes poking it with a stick or probing it with their fingers, talking together enthusiastically as the barrel moved around, keeping track of their movement. The red laser tracking each of their heads caused them to laugh at each other over gaining third eyes. while in truth it was the auto-turret subroutine system running over and over to make sure that those two weren't to exterminate. The two teenagers were so detached from the world surrounding them that neither noticed Liam approaching and arriving right behind, or Oxiden landing on the man's armored shoulder right after. I guess a demonstration as to why turrets aren't toys is needed. Even if they don't know what it even is, he thought with a smirk growing. The turret stopped moving all of a sudden, confusing the Gnostics as the strange creature froze. Then it flicked its head up and a loud bang echoed, loud enough to force the two to plug their ears folded backward, and the dire horse, drinking the nectar of a flower nearby, jerked in panic. This isn't toy, dangerous. Why you Titi and Maruk here, alone, without adults? Liam questioned, middle amused but serious all the same after the two unplugged their ears and glared at the turret. His voice caused them to freeze. Maruk, who was on his way to kick the hard metal feet of the turret with his bare feet. He froze at Liam's voice, but the momentum of the kick remained. He comically slipped before face-planting in the grass. Titi on her side slowly turned her head to be met with the head of the lost child. Then her gaze moved to his shoulder where a creature she only knew was shy and fearful glared at something behind her. The dire horse she immediately guessed. Why are you here far from clan? The lost child and their savior snorted in amusement before asking again, with one of his hair tufts above his eyes raised, and a hand scratching the bird's neck, calming it down almost immediately. My Patreon if you want to give me money and have chapters 1/2 finished in advance. Patreon.com/user U equals 60424165. 35. Prospect of prosthetic. You can speak our language. How did you learn? Can you tell me who taught it to you? Tuti exclaimed excitedly, zapping the lost child's questions in her excitement, while Maruk propped himself up and froze yet again at the realization the one they were looking for found them. Not only that, but creep right behind them, because they were focusing excessively on something new and strange, but ultimately quite minor. The fact it could have been a predator, instead, one that could have killed or mortally injured one of them. It was a bone-chilling realization, and even if Maruk didn't want to admit it, the words of his father were right. He was an immature, reckless, and stupid brat that needed to grow up, and fast because the entire clan needed him to. But that was why he was here as well. Learn from a wandering artist in exchange for knowledge, and for third times why here alone and not in clan? And no weapons too. Tiny daggers don't count. The lost child asked for the umpteenth time, a motion of his hand indicating the two to follow him, which they promptly and happily did. The dire horse followed as well. We want? No. It's to warn you that the Sakurams of the Tipani and Omatikea clans will arrive to meet and judge you. Tuti explained the grand line, and Liam stopped walking for half a second before continuing. For what? When and where? Liam asked, his voice deeper, each word leaving his lips to a point it sounded almost like a growl, but it didn't register in any of the teens. He wasn't pleased with this news, but again it was a future he fully expected to happen, particularly after his short and trippy mental meeting with the All-Mother. Actions and mistakes have consequences, be they positive or negative. He knew of the Tsahiks and their students, the Sakurams, thanks to Tsumong, how those men and women held an extremely deep connection with Iwa, some in legend even capable of hearing her omnipresent heartbeat from anywhere. Words of his existence would have and have spread, if not by Iwa, then by the Gnostics. A reality known since he saved the two kids. Actions had consequences. Good one in particular, but it wasn't the case here, as even if he didn't save them, the Gnostics would have found him by tracking the two blood and footprints. To see your true nature, the lost child's nature, if you are evil and to be dealt with like the other sky people. Where, and when I'm not sure, but as soon as my great-grandmother, the Tsahik, and the two come out of the sacred hollow, Titi let out, her tail straighter and ear folded. She was furious at the mention of some thinking of him being evil and needing to be slain like some kind of rabid animal. It was heartwarming in a way. Can't say I'm surprised they think of me like this. Not even angry. Unpleasant nonetheless. And Sacred Hollow. Is that the name of the hole that led safely underground? Likely. Good thing I collected all the red silicon a week ago, but traces of my passage are still there, and the tree will tell them as well, Liam thought, while the closed gateway of his base entered his line of sight. The teens moved fast, capable of keeping with his normal walking pace. by virtue of their longer strides possible with how freakishly tall they were, and they were taller than the last time he saw them. Even this young both were past the 2-meter, 6.6 feet, marked by a head or two, though they were featherweight and pretty much matchsticks, so probably plenty weaker than the average trained human. And with this, he also learned to his pleasant surprise that Tuti was the great-granddaughter of Itsahik, a very good piece of news that compensated for the bad ones. She might even be the current Sakurem, a very young one. Why she wasn't down there with the other he didn't know. He didn't want to use her or Maruk either, as the kid seemed pretty important himself with his seemingly son-father relation to the Nasics with the nose bone, which was himself likely an Oloikton. The term use might be a bit much though, yet there was no need to sugarcoat it. And if he could secure peace for himself, then he would, even if it means playing the manipulator to get it. He truly hated politics in all of its forms, but saying it wasn't necessary for having some sense of stability when in proximity to other powers was an utter lie. The meeting as well. Liam could foresee it would essentially be a political one of extreme importance, where most of the odds were stacked against him if he didn't want to start a manhunt with him as the target. Not that he particularly feared for his life, but he didn't want to have his hand forced to be tainted with more blood. The Omatikea and Tipani were the most affected by the RDA, with the first clan at the top in terms of violence received by said company. He didn't expect them to be friendly or reasonable with him for that matter, even if he was the lost child, and they would connect to the Tree of Divergence to learn more about him. Iwa was their goddess and mother, not their master. Liam was certain she could, with minimal effort, make it be the case though, but free wills, or at least freedom of choices, was of the utmost importance here. It will never happen unless they truly force her equivalence for hands like he supposed happened in the past. She wasn't Gnostics or human. Her goals, or more precisely the paths to achieve them, were unknown, beyond mortal comprehension. And he was sure he was within them, to his dissatisfaction, but also a relief. He thought of her in a way similar to the mythological Gaia. Ironically enough, extremely powerful, but practically never intervened personally due to personal beliefs and or interests. If Iwa wanted all the humans on Pandora dead, they would have all already been dead. She was the All-Mother. Everything from microorganisms to the biggest of beasts was part of her, though ultimately the RDA would just have chucked 1 or 2 big space rocks in retaliation, and all life on this ball of dirt would be gone. Anyway, he didn't know what she would divulge about him, but in any case, he could think it would be vague as Gnostics didn't seem to hear her voice as clearly as he did. Liam wildly guessed that it must be related to how sensible they are to psychic energy and a plethora more factors. Overall, it was bad, very bad, but not the worst it could get. He had a lot in his favor as well, such as the 2 teens and probably their families if they had some drop of honor, of which he was sure they had in plenty, and as such would back him up. There was also the Slinthus bone with the Anurai symbol carved on it that proved one of them was friends with him and that he would be welcomed. Not forgetting his tames, of which he could omit some of the truth of how he gained their loyalty and obedience. And finally, the seed from the Tree of Soul, but the last would either result in either immediate violence or peace, no in between. A risk he wasn't willing to take unless there were no other options left, and it turned for the worst. Then violence he would give. He was kind to others, and he will help if he can within reason, but he lacked mercy when it came to matters of his survival. Thank you for warning me. You saved lives. I'm very grateful to you too. The lost child thanked and praised them, and the words from their savior did have a big impact if how both immediately cheered was any indicator. Kids, they don't realize how important this is, Liam thought briefly. He was truly grateful to the 2 for this information, but their acts of almost fanboyism in his presence made him slightly uncomfortable. Uncomfortableness he didn't show, but it was far better feeling slightly uncomfortable than them feeling fear in his presence, something that to a degree he reckoned they should. Even if he saved them, mended the injury of one, fed them, and gave them a place to rest, he was still a dangerous and complete stranger with unknown motives. If it was naivety, how Gnostics thought, both, or something else he couldn't precisely tell. Maybe he was just projecting how he would have felt in their place. And they were teens, non-human teens with worldviews completely alien to him. Does anyone know you 2 are here? To know if more will come, he asked, and Maruk answered instantly with a toothy grin that didn't hide any of his inhumanly long white canines. Another fact he remarked: Gnostics seemed to always have white teeth. Not that he was different in that regard. Yes, Savior. A group of hunters sent by Father accompanied us here. We were safe while on our way, and still are in your presence. Meryl, our psych agreed as well. We needed to warn you of what is to come. It was mine, and Titi's idea in the first place too, Maruk said proudly, waving his one good hand in the air. A detail that Liam noticed earlier. The kid only seemed to use his right hand, and he even hid his left in a garment weaved of plant fiber. Do not panic or act a lot at the sight of Gladius. And let go of your Poly here, the lost child warned, confusing the Gnostics. The six-legged horse was left behind to drink the nectar from the field of exotically shaped and colored flowers. Arriving in front of the giant door, Liam pushed it completely open without much effort in front of the amazed gaze of the teens. All were met with the great ostropede mentioned earlier. It was rolled on its back and sleeping like a log. At this moment, three distinct reactions could be seen. Primal terror from Tuti, astonishment mixed with fear and excitement from Maruk, and a deadpan from Liam. The human whistled, but the great ostropede didn't react. A smirk grew on the lost child's face as he approached. To the growing horror of both Gnostics who cried out for him to come back and run, of course, he ignored the two. Their voices were not able to wake up the sleeping bird either. With his left hand hidden by his torso, Liam brought from his inventory an iron truffle. The scent wafted in the air. Gladius' eyes snapped open, and immediately after that, Liam threw the truffle at the other side of his base. The murder chicken looked out in shock as the snack flew before scrambling on its two legs and pursuing the flying delicacy. This is Gladius, not worry. Gladius is good. I hatched it, bonded with it. Same for this one. This one name is Occident and a few more. You can recognize them by jewelry on their bodies. He explained with a chuckle, pointing a finger at Occident still perched on his shoulder and then at the bracelet on its leg. This snapped the teens to reality. A few minutes of further explanation from Liam later reassured the two that Gladius was not a danger and a good bird, as long as he was here and they didn't annoy it. Or that the great ostropede had a random mood swing, but the last part went unsaid. He also briefly explained how he got his hand on the egg, and that it wasn't earned easily. This is awesome. Titi spoke about you hunting at Saltspring on yours. I knew it was the truth. Can I pet? Or even ride it? The male Gnostics exclaimed, not even waiting for Liam to answer, and as if all his fear was gone, he ran. No sprinted toward Gladius, right in front of Tuti's horrified gaze. The great ostropede noticed the Gnostics and lazily, without much care, swiped its left biosteel claw at him. It would have cut his chest open like a hot knife through butter and splayed his organs on the ground like the candies inside a broken piñata. That is if nobody intervened. Father didn't order it to stop, and the bird knew why. A lesson for the impudent lower being. So Gladius didn't put much heart into it. The blue creature wasn't even worth the energy. Otherwise, the hit would have been fast, efficient, and deadly. Occident took off. Then the lost child snapped into action. He moved, and he moved fast, faster than any hunters or creatures Titi had ever seen, as if he was the wind incarnate. She couldn't even tell how he moved from one point to another. Only the deep footprint left behind in the compacted soil told he ever was there. Liam grabbed Maruk's shoulder and yanked him back before the claw eviscerated the teen. Relief flooded Titi, and Maruk blinked in confusion as the human let him go, and he stumbled back to then be met with the narrowed, silvery gray eyes of the lost child. The human's voice then echoed into the Gnostic's ears. Anger all too clear for the teen to hear. Maruk realized he might have screwed up big time. Fucking suicidal little shit. No. And I forbid you to ever approach Gladius Star. This place is safe, but it isn't your playground. You're a guest. Make sure to remember that. Do not touch what is not yours without my permission. I'm sorry. Maruk said meekly at the merited scolding, ears folded backward, tail between his legs, and looking at the ground as if to hide himself. The problem was he was taller than Liam, and it didn't hide anything. It did the opposite, in fact. But the human didn't feel any pity. Moron, do you really want to get hurt that badly again? Tuti interjected, pissed off at her friend's actions. Her first word low, but not enough for Liam or Maruk to not have heard. The human didn't know what it meant, but surely something synonymous to idiot. No problem. I forgive him, just don't be moron again. This too goes for you, Tuti. You two are similar in many ways. A lesson for one is a lesson for both. Speaking of hurt, Show me left hand, Maruk, Liam said calmly. Both nodded and Maruk did as asked without hesitation, showing his greatest shame. Liam then told him to sit, and the inspection of the limb started. This looks bad, but at least it healed well enough. Scars are better than necrosis of tissue, or worse. Even if he is a little brat. I can help, and it will help me as well. I will have done it either way, but better to gain brownies points where I can, Liam thought while critically analyzing the left hand. Under Tuti's fascinated gaze, he used both of his eyes and hands, asking Maruk at times to move the remaining 2 digits, the little finger and the annular, to see if they worked. And also the right one to get a good grasp on how a healthy Gnostic's hand should be, from muscles, tendons, and bone structures. Liam brought a measuring tape from his inventory, using his pocket to hide how it magically appeared in his left hand. He took measures of both of the boy's hands. He wasn't using any conventional measuring unit, but it worked just fine and was close enough to the metric system for him. If a humanity from thousands of years in the future was still using it, with slight modifications to fit their better understanding of reality, then there were good reasons for it to be the case. He was no doctor or biologist, but that didn't make him inept in biology, more precisely a small part of it. Here was the simple biomechanics of how the structure of a hand let it do what hands do. Gnostic's hands being really human-like only helped. 1 digit less made it even simpler. Why are you doing this? It isn't for any further healing. Why? Tuti's curiosity won over, and she asked. Taking shape and form of hand 4 prosthetic. You will see, the lost child answered with a smile. Prosthetic? What in Iowa's name is that? Some kind of food? Maruk let out in confusion. You will see, both of you will need to come with the Tapanis and Omatikeas Sakaram, Liam said confidently, the smile not disappearing. It didn't help either of the two understand other than it will be important. My Patreon if you want to give me money and have chapters 1/2 finished in advance. Patreon.com/user U equals 60424165. 36. Private comms. Day 157. Sitting on a flat stone, the fresh breeze of the sea in his beard and hair, Liam was carving a piece of wood, one that was similar in texture and color to the highest quality white ebony. Various beautifully carved pieces of such wood could be seen next to him in metal boxes filled with clear liquid, a sort of glue that will protect the wood from rots, humidity, and other hazards. Each piece independently didn't look like anything, as they were either part of a thumb or an index finger. Evidently, it was part of the prosthetic for Maruk, the wood shell to be precise, currently in the process of being carved to be treated, then polished and treated again, to then be modified again, such as adding foam nails and grip pads. The use of metal being heavily frowned upon, if not outright considered a capital sin by the Gnostics, means the outside and part that could be seen will be 100% non-metal. The inside will be completely different, and was the more complicated and technical part. It will be a microcomputer connected to sensors all around that will activate the motor to move the titanium, bone, and tendon of the prosthetic digits following the muscle, tendons, and bones movement of the left hand and left forearm. Ultimately, nothing grandiose. It wasn't connected to the nervous system or anything. The fingers will grips, release, partially rotate L, extend each of the phalanx to a certain degree, and the like. Pretty much all of what those 2 digits, if healthy and not missing, could do. It will be powered by 2 small self-recharging hydrogen batteries while also being entirely waterproof. The last part was simple, as the bone used had hydrophobic quality. The 2 batteries are designed to never work together, as while one powers everything, the other is recharging. The fact the outside was made of wood was a minor inconvenience that would affect its efficiency and durability, but he was limited in the first place. It was half of a hand that needed to be done, one that would be superior to the real deal in power, but not dexterity. In any case, this wasn't going to be the last for Maruk, as he will grow out of it. It was only the first one Liam was making. He was going to improve on his craft. And if he wanted to do a powerful prosthetic for the kid, the entire arm with the shoulder blade needed to go. Simple as that. A surgical procedure he couldn't and didn't want to do, and doubted the teen would want either. Even if the idea of making a cyborg was exciting in its own way. Anyway, he started working on that right after the 2 left. The time passed talking with them was pleasant and interesting, as his supposition of who the 2 were was found to be correct by him asking, what is their clans and their status? Tuti was at Sakaram, the student of the Tsahik, the Olanji clan's spiritual leader and healer, while Maruk was the son of the Olanji clan Oloikton, the chief. The Olanji is one of the major clans in terms of cultural importance and influence. Liam was certain now it wasn't only a coincidence and luck that led the two to run at his base months ago. Iwo was involved in it, to a large degree. That he was confident of, maybe it was paranoia, but there never was enough of it when the local omnipresent deity was involved. Even if said deity didn't hold any direct malicious intentions. He was an anomaly that appeared in her world by unknown means. Investigating him in all aspects was the bare minimum. I think too much of this while I can't do shit about anything. It's unproductive. Liam thought his mind's worries segueing from the planetary hive mind to his own hive mind, focusing on Orion that was a good bit more than half 100 kilometers away from his current location. He sent the female Tetrapteron, the calmest of the four, with the two teens to be constantly informed in real time. He gave them a few instructions too. Orion was not a pet, and trying to play with it will end in the loss of fingers, and the teens will do the okay gesture to the bird when the Sakurems were out of their cave, and a thumb up when they are on their way to meet him. And both took it as a mission to not fail at any cost. Frankly, it was more to humor them than anything. Orion was smart enough to know what it must do, but it made things simpler. He sent Septin as well to cover the general area. The Olanji clan took the camp and collect information. Cracking his neck, Liam stored everything within his hands and his inventory, while data input traveled from the drone phone to his implant. It was time. He mentally commended the new metallic lid of the camera to slip open. His silvery gray eyes instantly lock on the screen, flickering to life, placed right below it. Greeting Max, where is Grace? Liam asked curiously about the evident lack of a certain feisty scientist while his eyes studied the scientist's expression and micro-expressions. He noticed the man was slimmer as well. Good for Max, but unimportant to him. Micro-expression, Liam could notice most of them, but was still unfamiliar with a lot. He could do such due to him perceiving the world slower virtue of him, simply being able to think faster, better, and more efficiently. Adding to that, his overall greater senses made this action even simpler. It was creepy, in a way, but very useful even if it needed practice. It didn't hit that much with the Gnostics, as he wasn't the most familiar with their expression, even if human-like, so it seemed normal, and they seemed to be not as slow in general, like cats. An apt comparison considering they pretty much were the mix of cat and elf with blue dye. But with other humans it was perturbing. Many details he couldn't even have remarked before were plain for him to see now, from the micro twitch of a muscle to the minute change in the iris of an eye. If his physical strength and a plethora of other characteristics of his weren't indicators enough of how far above he was from the average Joe, it was painfully obvious how inhuman he was. But it was because of this he was alive, so he could but do one thing, embrace it as it would be this way, for whatever how long he will live. Only a suicidal idiot would reject who they're simply due to their own hubris. He was who he was, no matter what he might become or what he might have been, as long as he doesn't forget who he is. Max Patel's expressions were composed and weary. Liam could see traces of uncomfortableness, nervousness, almost to the point of fear, and a hint of anger, but the last part wasn't because of him. A nervousness that was usual for Liam to see from this scientist, and easy to deduce he was the reason. Coughing, Max waved in greeting before explaining the current situation at hand, making a snarky comment first. "Thank you for asking, I'm fine. Grace is currently occupied with Selfridge, and from what I got it's about a shift of personnel within the Avatar program. One that she wasn't informed about. Why it's the case? I don't have a clue, but the last time I saw her she was furious to say the least." Nodding, Liam had already an inkling of who this sudden new personnel was for the Avatar program. The crippled guy. Speaking of said program, he didn't know much about it outside of the fact there was a driver in Avatar, Na6, and human hybrid that were piloted by the earlier mentioned driver. And the one at the current head was Grace. Max was a member of the various teams she had under her wings. If he was in her place and something like this were to happen, he could understand that it might cause a few blood vessels to pop. "Did you manage to do what I asked last time?" Liam inquired, his implant hidden behind the bandages glowing slightly brighter. Max on the other side nodded before showing an old fancy watch with intricate if damaged Sanskrit carving, then a second similar one, but without any carvings. This earned a smile from Liam, who only inquired further. "Good. I presume the second is for Grace." And might I know the frequency on which they are operating? And what can I anticipate they do? Straight to the point, as always, huh? Max mumbled under his breath and informed his interlocutor of every piece of information Liam may need, such as the frequency, one taken from a destroyed link unit, the bed used to drive Avatar, a frequency that was locked and unchangeable. The link unit was destroyed years ago during a Na-6 attack on the link shack. It was a type of infrastructure capable of housing humans light enough to be moved around by a Samson. And the functions of those two watches, they essentially were smartwatches, but with a tactile holographic function added on top. Pretty a smartphone you attach to your wrist, but with less power and memories. Ones to be used that needed the user biometrics such as face recognition, retina scanner, or the classic fingerprint scanner. From what Max told, those were antique watches, at least 90 years old from an old long-since gone company named Nokia, which at the mention earned a snicker and a moment of disbelief from Liam. Max didn't understand why there was such a reaction and decided to put it on the man not being the sanest of individuals on Pandora's surface. Something that was arguably true. Those two watches are Max's own, brought from Earth with a small amount of cargo allowed aboard the ISV. They are family heirlooms and as such held quite a significant sentimental value to him. All of their data was purged for what Liam asked, which he expected his gratitude over, but ultimately, it didn't matter as their data were copied on other devices. You can turn them on, Liam asserted calmly, his implant glowing brighter and brighter, almost to the point it could be seen through the layers of tissue bandage almost. He was focusing on the drone phone, to use it as an intermediary. Liam's implant could only connect to machines made or modified to be connected to it, but that didn't stop him from cheating, such as presently. Using a tool to use a tool. Liam added the new parameter while keeping the last, having modified the drone phone for everything to go smoothly. He didn't like faulty tools or anything he deemed faulty for that matter. Perfection was unreachable, but that equate to not thriving for the closest to it. Max did as asked and waited in clear confusion. He didn't have a single clue of what Liam was going to do, or how, or what even if he had several guesses. Not for the fault of not holding on to questions. The man decided to play mysterious and said, "Wait, you will see." A connection was made with the X-Drone N5 to the two smartwatches. It was shown by a green beep at the right top. Max accepted immediately, then 5 seconds later appeared a light blue downloading bar with a 3D model of metallic prism that had in its middle an ethereal core glowing an intense ethereal white above. It looked alien. All happened fast and without asking for any authorization of any kind for it to be downloaded, or any warning for that matter. It simply did. Max's first thoughts were that it was some kind of malware. And he was right to a degree if the growing smirk on Liam's face was any indicator. This is benign. It's just a software I developed. Though it's just the first version, and it will likely need to be updated. And don't worry, it's not like there will be a point in me doing something that will damage or destroy those watches, Liam reassured. It was the truth, even if he was essentially hijacking the two watches. I named it Overseer, and it will be used for us to communicate with more ease. From what we do here, to pretty much everything a smartphone can do. I'm reformatting the watch for it to operate as I have intended, he added. Wait, how are you even doing this? Max said, flabbergasted by it all, his eyes switching from smartwatches where the screen and holograms were ever shifting to Liam. Wait, he dismissed Max, and like this, nearly 5 minutes passed without him blinking as he stared into empty air. His left hand out of the camera's sight, but the way his shoulder was oriented indicated it in his line of sight. His silver-gray eyes narrowed or dilated at seemingly random intervals, but each corroborated the changements on the smartwatch's screens. And Max was getting creeped out due to how freaky it was, almost like the various human-like robots back on Earth. And he was also starting to worry, but just as he was going to break the silence, Liam blinked repeatedly before taking a deep breath. Then he said groggily, "Yuri, sorry, got a bit lost here in my thoughts. Be back in a bit." And the call suddenly stopped. Max blinked in incredulity as everything from N5 was cut off, and the holodoblet turned gray. What the actual fuck was that? Max thought he would have liked having the time to compose himself, but the two watches' screens started to blink, and the call started without him accepting it again. "I'm back, my excuses for everything that happened, but I never did that before." Max almost threw both watches against a wall in surprise due to the sudden appearance of two low-quality, holographic 2D images of Liam that looked both in random directions, and then his voice echoing in double. The volume is a bit too loud, and the hologram function, is not quite discreet. Any questions you might have? Liam mumbled and asked, the volume lowering with the luminosity of the hologram, while the one without the Sanskrit carving passed into sleep mode. No. And frankly, it's more Grace's thing. Max lied, something Liam instantly noticed but didn't point out as both knew the other knew. The scientist had so many questions right now, but he couldn't ask any of them. It was like a mental block. Understandable. Again, I apologize for what happened, and if any questions may arise, do not hesitate to text me via this software. Goodbye, Liam said with a frown, if it was of displeasure, annoyance, or something Max didn't know, but after he said his goodbye as well, he sighed in relief. Maybe a genetically engineered individual isn't the answer as to what he is. Only a real-life meeting will tell, and if he is okay to be examined. The scientist mumbled. He felt drained of every bit of his energy. Unknown to him, the microphones of both watches were still on and recording every sound. I think a bit of both, Max. Probably. I'm not even fucking sure myself. Liam thought, looking down at his implant for a brief instant before packing everything up. His head turned to see a flock of dorade verde flying, chirping, playing with one another, and surfing the wind above the waves of the coast, sometimes scooping strange fish in their beaks. The next second, a giant shadow manifested below them. Then it breached the water's surface. A giant mouth full of teeth, as long as Liam was tall, anchored on a gargantuan mouth, itself attached to a large head with one pair of black beady eyes committed, but all seemed compared to its body. An armored muscular monster of a creature with 4 pectoral flippers that is similar and superior in bulk to a blue whale. A literal leviathan. The flock had seen it arrive and flew higher in response. Nearly as high as the cliff he was on, but that wasn't enough. The shark-like creature jumped out of the water. And it jumped high, higher than its size and weight would let one thing. Almost flying, and with a wide open maw, it gulped a dozen of the Dorado verdente before falling back with a gigantic boom of foam and waves into the sea. I want one, were the immediate words that escaped Liam's lips, but it wasn't for now, as disappointing as it was. He has more important things to do. Though the idea, and while we're here, it's not like exploring the depth of the oceans and seas of this moon won't be part of the future. It's just not for now, and that's beside the point of managing to tame such a creature. My Patreon if you want to give me money and have chapters 1/2 finished in advance. Patreon.com/user U equals 60424165. 37. Lost Child. Fucking bitch. Parker Selfridge, the highest-placed RDA official on Pandora, and a thin Caucasian man, cursed right after Dr. Grace Augustine left his office as he slammed his fist on his desk to wince at the sudden influx of pain from his hand. It wasn't even his fault if one of the scientists was idiotic enough to die in a mugging of all things. It's not like this brilliant scientist couldn't afford bodyguards, be they organic or not. It placed great doubt on this said scientist's supposed intellect. What does she want him to do? Magic the scientist back to life? Clearly, as of now, it's not out of the RDA capabilities with the recent research and success in digitizing memories and personality on physical copy called Soul Drive. The problem was it was still in the testing phase when Tom Sully died. And to save the billions that were siphoned in the investment of this dead man, the RDA took the second-hand option. A crippled Marine, Jake, Tom's twin brother. Their similar genetics was the only reason. The sudden death and replacement of one of her future team members was the reason. She was beyond mad, which he found understandable, but the way she reacted was still completely blown out of proportion in his opinion. But either way, it wasn't surprising for her, and there was something else that she seemed pissed off about before she entered his office. He knew her for nearly 3 decades, and even if he despised her, he knew a lot about this woman for several weeks. She had a sudden shift in priority. One she kept from mentioning. She had found something, and he let her do as she pleased until he deemed enough time had passed, and she showed results, but it seemed fairly important. Though if this fairly important for her was the same for him, he didn't know. She was fascinated more by alien grass than anything else after all. They did hold very different priorities, but alas for her, he is the RDA administrator of this dirt ball full of savages. She might need another wake-up call on what was truly important and who was letting her do her research. You truly managed to piss her off right there. I think the only time I saw her nearly this peeved off was after the shooting of her school pet project, or when you set her to fuck off after she asked you to help for some disease affecting the blue monkeys. Miles Quaritch, the RDA security commander and Selfridge's right-hand man, an old muscular man with short grizzled hair and scars adorning his arms and side head, said amusedly as he entered his boss office. "Pissy scientist aside, can I get an overview of the new recruits?" the old colonel asked, earning an affirmative glance from Parker. He took his job relatively seriously, particularly about the lives of men and women under him. That didn't mean he will succeed in keeping all of them alive, but that's part of the job, and death was low for those brave, insane, or desperate enough to voluntarily be dragged to Pandora by the RDA. The only way of effectively and reliably communicating with Earth is either by sending messages directly through the ISV Venture Star, which took an extremely long time due to the travel time of the spaceship, or the use of superluminal communications, a type of device that gives the middle finger to the theory of relativity, as it permits information to travel faster than light by the use of an oscillating magnetic field. But to send 1 bit, it costs $7,500, and it's only 3 per hour. For example, a pixel of a random picture is 24 bits. While interesting, it was a very inventive device whose only real use was to send or receive extremely short and coded messages, such as emergency ones. And the reason why it was only now the new information reached Hell's Gate. Day 167. The last few days for Liam had been calm. He worked as usual, collected resources or created ones, and took care of his garden. And Thames, not forgetting the Slinger's head, which for the first 5 days after its capture refused to eat and lost a significant amount of weight, but it slowly changed, resulting in it now, while lighter than before, not to the point of starvation. And it was less hostile, but nothing worth noting. He crafted a lot as well. Up to now, he has a bit more than 1,000 bullets of all kinds combined, several dozen explosives from fragmentation, toxic gases, and incendiary grenades, to more than 100 explosive arrows. All of it is done through a slow and tedious process that will lead to many deaths, but a necessary one. And it wasn't enough. Most of the earlier mentioned bullets were for the turrets, and to have those arrows capable of blowing off the helicopter's rotor blades, he needed the hyperdense oil found at the Tree of Souls down below. An oil he was certain to collect more. Another meeting with the All-Mother will be necessary to avoid unnecessary problems. Awa won't probably care if he took a ton of such liquid, but the Gnostics certainly will, friends or not. He already had an idea of what to bargain for. He didn't need this oil to power his machines truly, and if he wanted something really potent, he would go for nuclear. It's a better source of energy. Though he neither did have uranium or thorium, or any other such material at his disposal, the regular heavy crude oil from the roots and the self-recharging hydrogen batteries would do for now. He wasn't powering an entire city after all. Some of his crafts were designed to be usable by his tetrapterons as well, for grenade pouches containing, well, grenades, the tetrapterons being capable of pulling the pin and dropping them from the sky, or potentially even place C4, or something akin to that, and them off in the future, or even potentially extremely powerful EMP if he cracked the secrets of the Pandorium. Not forgetting a multi-purpose pair of metallic claws that pretty much was a Swiss military knife. And for his great Ostropede, a saddle was out for the moment. He wanted to grow and avoid potential injuries, but adding 1 or 2 automatic turrets on its armor was already a possibility. Evidently, it was enough to defend himself against most Gnostics clans and creatures of Pandora, not enough for the war that is to come. Other than this, he communicated with the 2 scientists on an almost daily basis thanks to the program overseer. For all of those days, there were no face calls. However, there were a few short voice calls and a lot of text messages that was only received and answered when he wasn't in his base, noting that his base wasn't the best location for long-distance transmission in the first place thanks to Pandora's soil. The program in itself was just like any group chat application from his old world, such as WhatsApp, but upgraded and pushed for maximum effectiveness and ease of use. As such, it wasn't surprising it had access to everything of the watches and could use its recording functions without consent. He wasn't proud of this function, slightly disgusted even. The name of the program wasn't chosen by pure hazard, but paranoia was of utmost importance, and in general having a way to spy on others was always a plus. And he seriously doubted either of the two was naive enough to not believe or stupid enough to not know with all the clues he gave that he hadn't put in such measures. He asked them to give them blank slates for him to modify as he pleased. Anyone with 2 working brain cells would have. And to be fair, the camera, microphone, and various other sensors such as the one to moderate the wearer's heartbeat were, while functional, in dire need of restoration. The image quality was trash, and the range of the microphone for anything better than intangible white noise was barely around 2 meters, 6 feet 6. And also sometimes data was simply lost or corrupted thanks to various outside interferences. It was a miracle in itself that most of the 2 watches' original functions worked relatively fine to begin with. And from what Max further said, they endured a lot. One that, by the scientist's words, even saved his great-great-grandfather from a bullet to the heart because he forgot he left his watch there. If it was true or not, Liam cared little. In all cases, what could be taken from all of this was it made things easier for everything related to communicating with the 2 scientists. Though it could be improved on his side too. The drone phone was not good by any means, an ineffective design that will need rectification. Currently, Gladius had its 2 pairs of eyes hyper-focused on the ground where if you squinted and had a bit of imagination, you could almost decipher Arabic numbers. The great Austrapede cawed in frustration. 8 multiplicated by 7 and add 7. It's easy, Gladius. You can do it, Liam encouraged his great Austrapede, who was evidently in the middle of doing basic calculus that 99% of Gnostics wouldn't even be able to begin to understand. What Liam was doing by itself didn't hold much value. Gladius wasn't going to be a mathematician or anything of the like. But it stimulated the beast's brain, and it only cost the human a few minutes of his day. And being able to count was always a nice skill to have. Gladius suddenly tensed as input from the hive mind came. Fucking finally they out. I thought they died, its father said aloud, cracking his neck as he stood up. He had waited longer than he anticipated. Not that he complained, it gave him more time to prepare, but it was stressing him for one of the reasons he just mentioned. Having them die, even if it wasn't his fault, was bad. Unreasonable individuals weren't exclusive to humans, so being blamed for such a tragedy wouldn't be out of his expectation. It was exactly the type of scenario he would expect to unfold. A few hours later, within the Great Plain, flying slowly and close to the ground, was a mountain banshee. A creature that in normal circumstances wouldn't be found here. Riding it was a female Gnosix, the Tsakarem of the Omatikea clan. Her face was calm, yet her eyes didn't hide the internal conflict she was having since the Tsahelu with the Tree of Divergence. Many pieces of information, most fragmented and too complex or simply incomprehensible, were given, a lot she couldn't even begin to comprehend. However, what confirmed was the supposed what was the lost child, an anomaly, an unknown, something that had never been seen before by the Iowa. Someone alone and lost who suddenly came into existence. Someone young, barely older than an infant. It should be impossible, insane even, but it was the truth. She suddenly snapped her head to the right as a blue and purple Tetrapteron flew past her banshee at incredible speed, a speed that would have easily outpaced her mount at full speed without diving. Blinking in surprise at this caused her mount, seize, to grunt in annoyance, and it brought her back to why she was here. In front of her eyes was a lush tree standing up like a sore thumb within the plain, imprisoned by walls upon wall, composed of the ground and dead vegetation, while in front stood a double gate. Veering toward the ground, she commanded her mount to land, and it did so. She hopped off her mount before approaching her fellow Tsakarem, that did as she did. He dismounted his mount as well. A young Thanator, he raised himself, one of the many he raised. He was a bulky male wearing a head medallion holding the sign of the Tipani, his clan, a shield. It signifies they were warriors and hunters, but protectors first and foremost. Behind him was a small group riding dire horses. Within them was the Tsahik with her student, the Oloikan with his son, and 2 of the most able-bodied hunters, all from the Olangi clan. Where all of this creature that made loud noises go, Maruk wondered. It was something he noticed earlier, but though the lost child had displaced them closer to his home, he still didn't see any. Probably hidden, he guessed. 2 teens sitting behind him also noticed this, but neither of the teens voiced it out or even informed anyone about it, as the lost child had asked. They didn't understand how dangerous those bang-bang creatures were. He knows we are here. Sakarem Neri Picado, the male Tsakarem of the Tipani, informed with a frown, his gaze locked onto a red Tetrapteron above the gate. A point that Neytiri noticed as well. causing her to tense up her hand close to her bow. Indeed, young one, the old Sahik of the Olangi added and continued. The lost child must have known we were arriving for far longer than we realized. This Fkio perched above is not wild tetrahedron. And they knew why. The lost child could commune and control the fauna in a way similar to Nasik's. Using them to learn was something that wasn't unheard of but rare to see. There was a moment of silence where the small group approached further until the door slowly opened. The red Tetrapteron above, not having lifted its 4 eyes, gaze off them, being particularly focused over Neytiri and Akado. It knew. Everyone be calm. We are not here to fight. There is no reason to antagonize the savior of my son, and Titi, the Oloikton said, his voice strict, indicating that whoever acted rashly would be heavily punished, be they of his clan or not. This was known to the two Sakurims from foreign clans, simply due to Tuti having divulged it in an outburst of frustration when they criticized the human a dozen of eclipses ago. Yet it wasn't spoken on more until now. It wasn't for the lost child defense in particular, but for the two foreign Sakurims. Akwi hadn't forgotten how this man stopped and flipped a hunter riding his charging mount with no visible effort. It was imprinted in his memory. This man had exceptional physical prowess, beyond that of any Nasik's, proven by his axe and further supported by the cryptic words of the All-Mother. None here was unaware of his impossible strength, though to what extent they overestimated or underestimated him was an entirely different story. The Sakurims from the Omadikeya and Tipani focused, their bodies tensing up at the figure walking out of the door. A human, sky person, demon, the lost child, or Liam Cram as they learned he called himself. Over his face was no strange device, only the usual pelosity known for his species, a short beard, a pair of eyebrows, and hair put into braids in an unknown style, all dark brown. His left arm had a strange metallic prism growing out. It emitted a soft orange image that constantly flickered, something none of his kind had. It looked like an integral part of his body. He was wearing a pair of garments typical of his kind, known as pants. This one made of plant fibers and animal hide with a pouch attached to his side. Over the upper part of his trunk was a chest plate. It was made partly unknown material, but one that sported similarity to the one typically seen used by his kind, the rest being made of wood, leather, and plant fiber. Around his neck was a rather discreet leather necklace adorned by various objects from what looked like a seashell, to claw whether they were intact or in fragments, the broken part of a proboscis from some creature, a strangely shaped golden trinket, and more. His skin of an almost golden tint only put on display the defined and corded muscles of his powerful build. He was tall as well, for his kind. Taller and bulkier than any they ever saw. Not as tall as a Nasik's, far from it, but it was notable nonetheless. Then his face. Neither of the two cared much for the beauty standard of his kind, so it was unimportant. But his expression, it was cold in a way, almost detached, his eyes of an unnatural silver gray studying any and every one of their moves like the one of an apex predator, yet no malice or want to harm could be seen, only justifiable wariness. Yet the most shocking part was that even if he looked dangerous, he was weaponless, completely unbothered by this fact as he approached them, where both were armed, Neytiri with a bow and Akado with a spear. He never once let go of his gaze from them. "Welcome," the lost child said, a confident smile growing, his expression unchanging yet visibly more relaxed as he asked, "Welcome to where I reside. May I know who you are and your purpose of coming here?" Unknown to the Nasik's, all of his turrets, the 12 of them were hidden in the wall behind him, and below them, in the ground, were 36 landmines he could independently detonate with but a thought. No, he wasn't weaponless even without his inventory. In fact, he had control over everyone's fate here. But nobody outside of himself and his tames needed to be aware of this detail. My Patreon if you want to give me money and have chapters 1/2 finished in advance. Patreon.com/user U equals 60424165. 38. Transhuman. The words of the lost child resonated within the two Sakurim's ears, neither Neytiri nor Hakote having anticipated he would speak their tongue, and to such a proficient degree. Though ultimately it mattered little, it only eased communication. "I'm Hakote Yaleai, Sakurim and future Oloikton of the Tipani," the eldest of the two responded proudly, looking down at the human, both due to the great height difference and badly hidden disdain. His gaze concentrated on the metal that Liam's chest plate was made of. Interesting. Pretty important guy. Though he might need to tone down this air of superiority a peg or two, the human thought unaffected by the general aversion from this Gnosix on a general level. He broke the laws of Iowa, but again, breaking a few laws and attracting the ire of a few was better than dying. He wasn't a Gnosix, something that also attracted ire, though he didn't come off his own free will like the other humans, something the All-Mother was perfectly aware of. And anything he did at most caused minor damage, and most of these were mostly due to the wildlife going beyond what is reasonable to end him. The only possibility as of now of causing long-lasting damage is if he started to burn and kill everything in sight, or poison the land, this type of stuff. If he wanted to cause long-lasting damage at his stage, it would be intentional. Frankly, he could care less of how this Gnosix disliked him as long as no violence was involved and a peace accord could be made. Evidently him not hating his gut was always a plus, but you don't solve this kind of problem with a simple talk and become best friends. He chose to have metal shown on him. There was no need to hide this already known fact. Hiding it could be taken as a show of weakness and lead to misunderstanding. Even if having this a part of his armor was ultimately unnecessary and the Gnosix was well within the decapitation range of his war scythe. That didn't mean a small, clearly stupid, part of him didn't want him to punch the Gnosix in the face. Liam's eyes briefly went over Hakota's Thenator. The animal was showing great restraint. Good. Then his gaze shifted to the mountain banshee. It was relatively calm, and he didn't make direct eye contact to avoid unnecessary problems. It was a feeling doing so could risk the calm, flying creature becoming overly aggressive. "And who might you be?" he asked the female Gnosix standing in front of the mountain banshee. Her expression was hardened, hand clasping her bow, ready to attack at any moment, clear hate in her eyes, but something told him it was more of what he represented than him. Neytiri Diskahan Moi, Sakarem of the Omadikeya. We have come hearing of the lost child through Iowa and words of the people. We have come far from our home to learn who is the demon upholder of such a title. She spoke coldly. At the end, almost spat at him. He frowned slightly at that, but not for her general unpleasantness and hostility. He couldn't care less. He was above reacting negatively to such behavior. But again, like with the male Gnosix, a punch or two to the face with a bit less than a third of his strength should take her down a peg or two. The distance not being a problem, as a simple leap would solve everything. Now that I think about it, she is familiar, and the clan too. He wondered before rapidly finding out why she seemed so familiar. Oh, so this is likely the Pocahontas that Mr. Cripple falls head over heels over. And this clan was the one in direct conflict with the RDA, a fact that he learned Grace was tasked to solve. He could see how much of a mess it was. The RDA, while clearly the one at fault, didn't equate to the Gnosix being without fault. There were opportunities to be taken, plans to work with them already set in his mind. It wasn't a matter of him betraying his species, preferring an alien species over his own, but one of survival. He would love to be able to work hand in hand and cooperate with humanity, but alas, it was impossible. It would never happen, or in a way remotely favorable for him as of now and in the foreseeable future. He didn't have much of a choice. He didn't want to be an added casualty, at least not within his own terms. Demon, if it so fits your view of my person, I will not deny it. However, know all I want is a peaceful interaction between me and the people. May you believe it or not, it matters little, Liam said, and as anticipated, he could see both not believing him, both having rather negative reactions. Neytiri was showing signs of visible anger, almost rage, though on the Olangi side no problem was to be reported. From the old formal Gnosix he guessed was the Tsahik, the male with a bone nose that was the Oloikton, the two hunters and the two teens, of which both seemed mixed between proud and irritated. That is what your kind told us, peace. We believed them, as strange and different as they were from our ways and us. Blind as they were, we tried, but they didn't listen. We're deaf to our words, and peace was not what was given. Only invasion, destruction, death, and tragedy. Neytiri hissed out as she approached him, just as Hakoto did. She stood several heads taller than him. The man was unfazed. This seemed to irritate her further, but a soft glare and click of the tongue from the Tsahik behind was enough to remind her to come down. For the moment. Trusting the sky people cost her a lot. Too much, her sister. Believe what you want, Sakurem ne Tairi, and similar for Sakurem Hakuto. And anyone listening, I need, want, and desire peace. I know of why you react this way, but I'm not of the RDA or of any humans present. I appear similar in appearance to them, but I'm different, far different. On both mind and body, the lost child said truthfully, switching to English for untranslatable words. I'm not really human anymore the same way I was before, am I? It was a realization he had long since come to acknowledge and accept. It was ultimately good, more than good even, but to know you will forever be different than anyone else thanks to a chasm that will never be crossed was more complex. Even if said chasm was really, really low on the problem ladder. Not necessarily bad, but it entailed a lot. His engrammic matrix, where his personality, knowledge, and memories, which equated his soul, mind, and spirit. All of this resided within a glowing piece of metal intricately connected, fused even, to a genetically engineered superhuman body made in a tube. It was a mere cybernetic augmentation, and it was the tip of the iceberg. He sported many characteristics beyond what a baseline Homo sapiens possessed. He may look human, act like a human, and speak like a human, but he wasn't truly one, or considered as one by the norm of this universe, and his own as well. He was superior in every aspect related to physicality and the mind. It wasn't arrogance, it was factual. A lot are more knowledgeable than him in a myriad of fields, more apt at doing untold amounts of tasks, more beautiful, morally superior, wiser, and more, but this was normal. He wasn't omniscient or close to the ridiculous notion of perfection. It didn't change what he was. The word transhuman came to his mind several times from both his knowledge and the game lores, and he supposed it was close enough. His words led to a short confusion within the two Sakurems before a realization hit them. This was why his species never came to be mentioned by the All-Mother. Though, he still was a stranger, not a child of the All-Mother, and mistakes were not to be repeated. His status as an individual resembling a human, yet fundamentally different, was already within the perception of the Olangi clan, even if none of them interacted with or had seen any other humans. They understand a general grasp of what a human was. Only appearance-wise, Liam Cram was truly alike, and that was not entirely the case for this category either. He was the lost child, an apt designation, appearing from nowhere, alone, young, learning about the world to survive, with no direct mention of him being of the Sky People. The All-Mother perceived him differently. Rare were the individuals capable of garnering her attention, fascination even, and none to that extent from Nasik's known history. Gladius come, the lost child spoke, words only Neytiri could decipher, and as she was going to translate for her fellow Nasiks, her eyes widened, her ear folded backward at what she saw, and with her and her fellow male Sakurem backed away. At the same small gasps were heard from the Olangi hunters, then a low growl and guttural shrill, each respectively from the Vanator and her mount. The Tsahik and Oloikton were already informed by the teens, but seeing such creatures up close led to a small widening of the eyes. One known for its foul temperament, courage, tenacity, aggressiveness to any who approach, and if mortally injured capable of killing or permanently crippling with its last cry filled with spite and rage to any who was too close. Even the rare ones that Nasiks bonded with could lead to said Nasiks finding themselves as the casualty of their temperament. They never truly became tamed, similar to the dire horses, but even more pronounced. They neither were the biggest or strongest or smartest or fastest or most prolific, venomous, poisonous, adaptable, or resistant of Iowa's children, but those earlier traits made it so why they were considered such a big threat, wild or not. Walking proudly out of the giant gate was said creature. It was taller than any Nasiks or other animals present. Muscular back wings spread wide, open, showing eyes like black dots encompassed of silky blood-red skin. A colorful crest atop its head, followed by a long neck, its two pairs of front limbs ending each in 3 long, sharp metallic claws as black as the night. Their sharpened metallic sheen reflects the rays of the suns. It walked calmly, eyes scanning everyone in vigilance until it lowered its head, and in front of everyone, of which only 2 weren't shocked, let Liam scratch its neck, an audible purr-like sound resonating, its body almost melting in the human grasp. It moved one of its cues, And without Liam's need to do anything, the usual pink furry tendril waved softly in the air before connecting to the man's specimen implant. His eyes suddenly dilated, and he felt every thought of his tames. Compared to the simple mental link, it felt as if a storm was gone. It was crystal clear and infinitely more complex and detailed. The experience was always a rush, all of his mind senses, for lack of better terms, focusing on the connection. Thought, I'm not dissimilar in various aspects. Technology is part of me, and I work to make it so. But my efforts, actions, objectives are toward my survival. I harm and will harm, but I do not seek to harm more than necessary for me to live and prosper. If I'm a threat similar to RDA, the current threat to my life, it is for you to decide. Know that harm will come to whoever wishes harm to me, and act upon them. I do not wish to cause harm, but will not hesitate to. Liam spoke, word-holding, but the cold, hard, and honest truth. The same message he told to Iowa, but formulated differently, was risky, but he won't hide in that aspect. He won't bend the knee and beg for their approval. He didn't disdain them, but seeing they weren't backward in many aspects will be a lie. Being open and consistent in your words and actions was always a good quality, particularly with a species that was now only learning what lies were and how words held no values but deceptions without actions. Trust was something that he didn't really believe will happen, at least not without underlying actions. The tension was rising, both Sakarems of the Omadikeya and Tipani, going over his words and the unhidden warning, and adding to that the full focus of 4 tetrapterons who appeared with no one noticing. The great ostropede with claws almost rasping together, and the lost child. Both Nausicaa at that moment deeply felt their instinct scream at them to back away. But all of it disappeared, just as it came, as a gentle smile graced Liam's feature. One of the tetrapterons flew out at the same moment he spoke. Now, my words to you two having been heard, Maruk come. The conversations needed to be shifted to something else for Neytiri and Hakuto to have the time to digest his words. All was mostly going as planned. The crippled teen was puzzled, as were the Olangi present, did as he was asked, and without care for the danger, Liam and the great ostropede were approached by the term in front of the gaze of the Sakarems. A glare from Gladius and the word of acknowledgement from the Olangi Oloikton stopped Hakuto from grabbing the teen's left hand to yank him out of potential danger out of sheer disbelief. This creature just threatened them. The soft beats of a pair of wings were heard right after, and the tetrapteron that flew earlier landed on Liam's right shoulder, a leather satchel in its beak. Good girl, he said, giving the bird a piece of meat jerky that came out of a strange trick of hands as he did so. He then gave the closed satchel to Maruk. Without needing to be asked, the teen undid the leather bind with his teeth and started at what was inside in shock. The conversation he had with Liam while the human inspected his right hand coming out full of force. Still holding the satchel by the teeth, he took out with his left hand half a right hand that sported a thumb and an index finger made of a pearl white wood, intricate carving of both known and unknown animal. Attached to the wood was clasp and what looked like a sleeve. It was made of a black, smooth-to-the-touch material, and unknown to the Nausicaa, it was nylon and carbon fiber woven together. And there were hidden sensors and cables, all built to be comfortable and keep everything together and working. Is this? Maruk asked in a voice trembling, not sure of what it was, but his heart beat faster in palpation, his right hand shaking. His eyes locked onto the strange construct of expert craftsmanship. Yes, but it isn't a simple accessory to hide. It is more. Let me help you. Take that off first, the lost child said, his focus on both Maruk and the Sakarems, even if he didn't look their way. He had other pairs of eyes after all. Maruk took off the piece of the garment over his right arm that hid his ravaged right hand without hesitation, an unpleasant image for everyone if for different reasons, and it was worse for him. He didn't feel physical pain from it. He felt sometimes the fingers were still there, clenching, and he couldn't do anything. One of the symptoms known with this type of injury after healing, but no solution was known, but to grit your teeth and bear it. And with Liam's help, the prosthetic was safely and securely attached over his forearm and what was left of his hand. My Patreon if you want to give me money and have chapters 1/2 finished in advance. Patreon.com/user U equals 60424165. 39. Cyborg of wood. Act as if you were closing both your fists, muscles and tendons flexed. The lost child said after the prosthetic was snugly fitted onto Maruk's right hand. Straps made for it to fit and adapt to the limb, if need be. What? The teen didn't truly understand what was asked, his heart thumping too loudly in his ears for this, and by inadvertent, he moved various muscles grouped within his forearm, wrist, 2 good digits, and palm. All gave various data to a myriad of sensors within the prosthetic. They almost instantly traveled toward the microcomputer, and it translated every piece of information into action as the various micromotors wired to life in silence. The wood thumb flexed completely, followed by the wood index finger doing the same before the two extended again. Maruk froze at that, his father having approached had a very similar reaction. Tuti's eyes widened at the sight, mind racing to what Liam did this last time, and the mention of a prosthetic, and that Sahik of the Olangi smiled slightly at the sight. The teen might be an idiot, but that equates to him needing to suffer more than necessary, and whatever unknown artifact the lost child had made seemed to be able to replace a hand in more than a simple appearance. This is his blessing, the lost child's blessing, she thought, approaching closer, putting a hand over her great-granddaughter's shoulder as she did so. Old age didn't come with many positives, and she was getting weaker day by day. This being held many surprises, and as he said, becoming an enemy of his promised many great harm, that she held no doubt. She dearly hoped many would show it this way, and didn't antagonize him due to past experiences with the Sky People. But she wasn't naive. She mostly hoped he showed himself to be merciful. She was sure even if he currently was weaponless and wide open to any attack, he must have plans in place if either of the foreign Sakurems acted rashly. Or even of her people, as unpleasant and shameful bringing the thought was. She held little doubt the hunter she exiled, a reckless psychotic boy that she held little respect for, came back for some sort of revenge and died by the lost child's hands, but it was just as possible he got killed from many other sources. The All-Mother was not as merciful as one might think. Maruk gasped as one of the artificial digits moved again, flexed and unflexed. An ecstatic smile appeared on his face, eyes almost watering in joy at the sight. He tried to move each of the 2 digits again, failing, but the earlier vague explanation of Liam now made sense. Using what was left of his right hand, flexing the 2 remaining fingers with various groups of muscles, the 2 artificial fingers moved in accordance. The microcomputer and motors seem to be well calibrated together. It will mostly need training on his part to learn how it properly works. But he seems to do good, Liam thought, pleased with his craft, his implant glowing slightly brighter as packets of data from the prosthetic were delivered to him. You will need to train and adapt to it for bed. Are you all right? The lost child interrupted himself, his silver eyes focused on Maruk. The male teen's entire body was trembling, his head down and left hand grasping his right wrist. Thank you. I thought I would have. Thank you. I thank you, the teen mumbled, a voice that would have been inaudible to a normal human, and it was also shaky, filled with disbelief and joy, his entire being transfixed on the wood hand as he slowly moved the 2 artificial digits, disbelief and a plethora of other emotions in his eyes. Happy to know it please you. I suppose you realize, but this is the prosthetic I spoke of. An example of how technology can be used. There is no sense of touch like skin, but you will feel weak forces against skin of right wrist, meaning you holding an object with tip of wood fingers. Be careful, precise movement will need time to get, Liam said with a warm smile. He put his left hand into the pouch at his side. He mimicked the action of picking something. He took out a small, round, purple fruit and threw it at Maruk, whose eyes widened, and he reacted on instinct, grabbing the fruit within both living and non-living fingers. And as Liam said, a pressure could be felt when the end, almost rugged, part of the digits touched the fruit while there was no sense from them whatsoever. Maruk took a bite and smiled in excitement, blood rushing in his body as he ate the fruit without much ceremony and moved the artificial finger, closing and opening his fist. Each time he did, disbelief could be seen. He felt like he was in a dream. Good reaction, excellent result, better control than I anticipated. It will take time to get used to, Liam added, smile growing slightly. His eyes then briefly shifted towards the 2 foreign Sakamans. They stayed apart. Seeing they were alienated wouldn't be the biggest of hyperbole, but they stayed vigilantes, keeping their eyes and ears on him and his actions with the Olangi clan's young ones. Their expressions were hard to read, but conflict could be seen in their eyes. This act he did was quite impactful to them. Neither were nihilistic or experienced enough to believe it was planned, or at least planned to somehow manipulate their feelings and better their impression of him. Not this way anyway, even if it would be quite flagrant to humans. Though if these two were here, or not, Liam would have built the prosthetic. He just wouldn't miss the chance to show what he was capable of and that he had more than mere words. In all cases, it was a heartwarming scene. To see such a young teen be almost brought to tears by a gift that gave him back lost bodily function due to a traumatic event. Neytiri, in particular, did pity his situation. He reminded her of many teens who act this way, some less lucky than him. Death of children was extremely common. Hakuto, on his part, saw the teen as reckless and deserving of such punishment through the damage of the wounds, but all the same not deserving of death. Stupidity was not to be praised. An appropriate action needed to be set. At least they do seem to be able to think things through. Rational individuals, even if of different ideologies, are always welcomed, and being on roughly good terms with them is but beneficial. The man internally remarked he needed the RDA to be driven off Pandora, mostly the military part of it, and for that, the help of the native was required. Ultimately something temporary, but it will give time. He couldn't do this alone, nor did he want to even be part of what would be a war in the first place. Killing and causing death was extremely selfish, but better than getting killed or experimented upon. The life of the innocents mattered to his consciousness, but his own life and well-being mattered excessively more than simply feeling good about himself. Cowardly, cold, monstrous even, but rational. Being emotional and overly emphatic will not be of help much here. Not that any actions he could take to stop the RDA will happen without the need for extreme violence and or putting himself in great danger. Warning the Gnostics was pointless for now. Not that they will truly believe him. This is incredible. He made you a new hand, Maruk? Titi declared in excitement, forgetting to stay composed. She ran, jumped, and then hugged Maruk from the back, causing him to yell incoherently as he fell toward Liam, who with an amused smirk simply dodged them by stepping aside. I did expect a positive reaction from them, but I might have underestimated it, Liam thought. For him, it was a bit less than 36 hours of work, not taking into consideration the wood treatment that took time too, but not his direct intervention was required for most of it. Doing a prosthetic with only a few measurements and not a great understanding of Gnostic's anatomy and biology, and no prior experience in that domain was, to put it mildly, beyond exceptional. And he could have done it faster. He took his time since he wanted something relatively robust enough to work for at least a few months as the hand of a reckless teenager while being reliable and as well not completely horrendous looking. Form and function working in tandem were always what should be thrived for when attainable. It could be better, way better, but there was no real need to use more time and resources. It was a simple gift. Just as Titi said, he gave him a new hand. It would be very impactful towards the teen, who might have dramatically thought his life was over and hid it. But this in any case was a new chance, though it was still not a real hand, a lesser version of it. Also why he didn't make it more lifelike. It isn't a real hand. There is no reason to pretend that it is. It wouldn't help the teen's mental health. Maruk, as cold and difficult as it sounded, needed to get over it. His right thumb and index finger were gone for good, unless the use of cloning technology or similar regenerative solution were clearly out presently, and even then he doubted the teen would accept. I will be eternally grateful for what you have done for my son and the Olangi clan. Liam Cram, ask why. The chief of the Olangi approached, staying at a safe distance from the great Ostropede, and said, voice filled with joy and honest gratitude, yet still stern and composed. His features softened stand mirthful amusement could seem as he gazed upon the Maruk and Titi. Good pronunciation, and pleased to hear this from you. You are the Oloikton, right? The human praised and asked, his attention shifting toward the middle-aged Gnostics. Indeed, I'm Askway, or aka leader of the most powerful horse clans. The Olangi, the Gnostics declared proudly said, but then frowned and said with a lower voice, and I apologize for the action of one of my hunters. This shall never be repeated as long as I live. Apologies accepted. Mistakes happen, but as long as they are not repeated, it is fine. Let's bury the hatchet. It means to make peace after a conflict. There is no reason to force more upon this incident more than necessary, Liam responded, the meaning behind those words being clear to Askway. He didn't forget, and as the chief, he was responsible in a grand party for the actions of his people. Askway thanked the lost child again. It was a grave mistake on his part, even if impossible to have predicted. As irrational as it was, he felt deep shame. Even more so now with the fact this man created and gifted such a precious and life-changing artifact to his son. He was greatly indebted to Liam Cram, a fact both new and one that didn't need to be mentioned. Know that as long as I and he live, the clan will support you in future problems that may arise with the people due to what you are on the outside. I'm Marali, the Tsahik of the Olanji, and I deeply thank you for doing what you weren't needed to. They wouldn't have been able to come back without your assistance. I thank thee, lost child, the old Nasik said slowly with cloudy white eyes. Not fearing the great ostropede, she walked closer. She had seen a lot that Liam could tell, and she looked like a crazy old woman that would outlive most of her descendants. She looked the part for her role, he supposed, and unknown to him. His amusing thought was right, and the reality far from pleasant. Tati was to be the Tsakarem for all others who had passed away. Life on Pandora was not easy. Being in harmony with nature didn't equate to being safe. They weren't separate from the food chain or other dangers. Liam hummed positively at that. Though the opinion of the Tsahik, Olo Aikden, and a few more was important, he was sure most of their clan didn't feel such a sense of gratitude towards him. As it should, he only saved Tuti and Miruk. Not all were going to instantly become best friends or like him at all for that matter. The two hunters they brought looked serious, if slightly puzzled, and amazed about what was unfolding, nothing hinting toward aversion. Though those were surely chosen for that reason. It's just that as much their voice was important, it didn't represent all of whose they guide and lead. This prosthetic has metal and product of the ground within, the lost child stated calmly and in a relatively low tone. And to his stupor, none of the two reacted negatively. The elderly and stern religious guide smiled slightly at his words. The All-Mother always watches. She always watches you. And I hear her voices, of the echoes informing me of great and many things of what she deemed me worthy to know. You broke our sacred laws, but those are our laws. Our way of life is antithetical to yours in many ways. You did not come here of your own choosing. Abiding by them, if it impedes your survival, is not what is right. A great distinction from the sky people and the demons within them, Liam Cram. She's still taking a deep breath, the All-Mother. And so, I by extension of her will, do not condone you of using the metal of the ground for your crafts. None of your actions were born out of simple materialistic greed. You want to learn and understand with a pure motivation of wanting to thrive. That is surprising for you to see it this way, but this only under certain conditions, right? He said pensively. He thought she would be more close-minded, and his implant glowed slightly brighter. Gladius shifted behind him, not letting his guard down even once. This little detail of his implant didn't go unnoticed by any Nasics. It was one of the strangest parts about him. It was similar in some aspects in how their Sayuritan bioluminescence acted, though it was distinctively different. Conditions? No, not truly. What is valuable is respect and understanding of what is taken, and that all that was taken must be brought back to the All-Mother one day, that Tsahik answered cryptically. Not doing in excess seemed to be key, and he was essentially borrowing as long as ultimately all came back to the earth. It seemed simple enough, but again, this was the point of view of one Tsahik. One he was sure of if he didn't do so much would not have been so understanding. And also the different trees of souls, each being part of a greater whole, that is Iwa, but each contradictorily being separate entities with his understanding must have subtle discrepancies in their views. And so 20 more minutes passed with Liam speaking to the two most important figures of the Olanji clan. A deal was sealed, one similar to the one with Tsumong of Anurai, and the two RDA scientists, knowledge for knowledge. Traveling people know a lot, from places to stories, fauna, and flora. Not all would be immediately useful or useful at all, but information was information. My Patreon if you want to give me money and have chapters 1/2 finished in advance. Patreon.com/user U equals 60424165. 40. Jake Sully. May 19th year, 2154. Currently 1711. Location Hell's Gate. Dr. Max Patel was showing the new arrivals, two young men, the part of the base reserved for the Avatar program, more precisely the biolab, both new ones having seen their Avatar already. One was a thin man, Norm Spellman, a PhD in anthropology and xenobotany with a certification in xenolanguage on top of it. having dreamed all of his life to be here and trained for years for it to become a reality, and lucky enough to be chosen among the several hundredth young minds. Overqualification was the bare minimum to have the possibility to be here with an avatar. He was speaking enthusiastically about a book on Pandora to a man in a wheelchair looking around broadly, half listening to the scientist's words. This was Jake Sully, a discharged Marine. He was paralyzed from the fifth lumbar vertebrae down to the legs, and everything in between he couldn't move or feel, all thanks to a spinal injury he got in Venezuela. Though being a war veteran didn't come with insurance for such injuries, and even if easily healable, it needed money, an exorbitant amount of it, one he didn't possess. Max suddenly spoke, presenting to the two Dr. Grace Augustine. She was standing around an aisle looking over data on an holotablet and a lit cigarette between her lips. The woman, not being deaf or blind, had already noticed them, sighing while running a hand over her hair as she walked toward them. Max presented Norm and was on his way to do the same as Jake, but was interrupted as she spoke to Norm that then shifted to Nosix. Not bad, you still sound a bit too formal though. A problem only time here will fix, Grace praised. I have still much to learn. Norm nodded at the compliment while Grace's mood turned for the worse as her attention shifted to the crippled Marine. This is Jake Sully. Max presented the second new member, pushing his back against the earlier mentioned aisle. He was prepared for what was to come under the poor sod. Ma'am, Jake said cordially and gave his hand for a handshake, which went completely ignored. Yeah, I already know you. Not the PhD who trained years to be here. Your brother? The one I wanted and should be here, but beggars can't be choosers, she said, forced to look down at him. He is dead. I know it's a big inconvenience to everyone. Sorry to disappoint, he responded sarcastically to her remark, annoyance hidden on his face. Do you have at least a modicum of training in labs? Ever used a gas chromatograph? Or do you even know what that is? She asked, voice laced with a mix of anger, annoyance, and frustration. Though she stayed composed, mostly, it wasn't specifically to him she was angry at, but it still spilled. Negative for the three. Sorry to disappoint, ma'am, he responded plainly and mechanically, keeping constant eye contact. Any actual lab work at all? She breathed in and out, calming slightly the storm brewing inside. She asked further, not having much expectation for the incoming answer, outside of knowing he is a war veteran, ages, and other minor aspects such as blood type. There wasn't much. High school chemistry, but I ditched, he answered plainly, and that's what broke the camel's back. She had low expectations for him, even if his twin brother was a genius from the little she got, and Jake managed to still disappoint. You see, they're pissing on us without even the courtesy of calling it rain. A fucking dropout, trigger-happy asshole, she snapped before storming off to Sleffordage. She was aware whatever she would say will enter one ear and go out from the other, but that mattered little as of now. Nobody would have been happy to get the equivalent of a mole in their team, because that was what he was even if he doesn't realize it. That went smoother than I anticipated, Max mumbled, but it was loud enough for Norm and Jake to hear and earn a raised eye from the latter. You sure? Jake asked amusedly, not believing the scientist one bit. His first impression of the xenobotanist wasn't the best. Trust me, when she learned of the situation it was worse, but I hope you forgive her for her less than gentle behavior. It's just a lot is going on, and it has been for quite a non-insignificant time, and most of the pressure is on her, Max explained further. His words, unknown to the others, included more than the Nosix and RDA conflict. The ex-Marine gruffly nodded. He had got treated worse, way worse many times. Someone rude he just met won't faze him much, if at all. The next few days for Jake were one of the most interesting in his life, driving his avatar being at the forefront. It was more than surreal. Being in control of a new, stronger, taller, new senses, new appendages, and bluer body was mind-blowing. And he could walk again, but it wasn't his body. It was an exceptional feeling, almost like a dream, but there was a clear distinction between his avatar and his body. His first outing in Pandora's forest, a mission where he served as a guard for Norm's and Grace's avatars on the ground while they did their sciences. This simple mission turned into a fiasco, thanks to his ignorance. And after being chased by a giant six-legged hairless carnivore for an unknown amount of time, where a long fall and the loss of most of his equipment were involved. Thereafter, he was chased again by similar, if considerably smaller creatures, to which he would have died if a female native didn't save him, of which he later learned the name, Neytiri. This led from one thing to another, and after getting her home, a giant tree, the biggest he ever saw, he became her student of sorts. He didn't understand why or how, but it happened, and this seemed to displease Neytiri. This meeting with the Gnostics was significant and met with surprise. It got him a personal mission from Colonel Quaritch to, somehow, convince the Omaticea to get out of their home tree. Jake accepted it without an ounce of hesitation. And not even 2 days later, he, Norm, and Grace, with the latter two avatars, his avatar still sleeping in the Gnostics clan, were escorted by an experienced pilot to Site 26 on Grace's order. This was for reasons Jake wasn't sure of, but what he knew was that it made Norm beyond euphoric, like a kid in a candy store, and he perfectly understood why. The site was supernatural beyond his comprehension of what should be possible, etc. It is one of the most fabulous things he ever had the chance to lay his eyes upon, only coming second to the sight of this moon from outer space. Floating islands from car size to literal mountains, kilometers in height, and with most if not all connected by gargantuan vines. Ever-present dense mist constantly replenished by giant waterfalls, and so much more. The site was situated on such a floating island and was composed of a small pod-like habitation for no more than 10 people lost in the middle of the Hallelujah Mountain, completely cut off from the world due to the powerful magnetic field. This brought to the present. One of the link units unsealed itself, the door slowly opening itself. Groaning and repeatedly blinking, Jake pushed his upper body up to then, with practiced ease, put himself on his wheelchair. Moving himself toward the fridge, he took a ration, a 3D printed lasagna, before turning it in the microwave. He looked to his right and was met with a certain auburn-haired woman whose entire focus was on a smartwatch. "You know there aren't any signals here, right?" Jake said, earning a bored glance from Grace. This old smartwatch was something she seemed to always wear, and from the look of it wasn't only to know the time, and Max also had the same model. Though beside this, he didn't really put any more thought into it. That wouldn't be entirely correct. We aren't actually deep enough in the magnetic vortices for us to be fully and completely cut off from the outside world. If that were the case, we wouldn't be able to use the link unit. She turned off the watch and explained. She was waiting for Liam's message, one that arrived slowly but surely, literally bit by bit, and each bit gave another bit to let the devices know it was successfully received or sent. Slow and tedious, but it protected against loss of data. Liam knew she was here. She said it while the three of them discussed potentially meeting in person with a time and the like. Mostly her and her avatar with Liam. A meeting that either would need them to fly to where the man is, which means making his existence known to someone else, or him moving to a specific location, or a mix of both. Either of those prospects is in no way possible as of now. Liam didn't care that others knew of his existence by itself. He knew that it was inevitable. What mattered was when, how, and who. He wanted there to be a minimum of control until all turned for the worse. To prepare, she inferred. Trust had started to build between the three, but it was a great risk to be taken for him and them as well. It wasn't the man's paranoia. The only reason for it to be far from simple. Norm was one of the potential people on the list, however, to be given knowledge of the Liam situation, even if she knew him for barely a week. He was more trustable than an ex-soldier. All that needed to be said, biased maybe, but factual, and Jake was simply not the sharpest knife she met. He wasn't a bad apple, far from it. He was honest, a bit too much at times, and had a big heart. She just didn't know him enough, but one thing she knew, however, was that for him duty came first. He was and still is a soldier at heart. And soldiers would do monstrous things, even at the cost of their consciences and bodies. In that aspect, Jake Sully was a perfect example. She was more surprised Jake's avatar still hasn't become a porcupine, or died due to slipping from a too high place, or died with the hundredth of other ways to stupidly die. He was exceptionally lucky, not omitting the fact Norm held no loyalty or interest toward anything besides Pandora and his passion. Coming here pretty much means abandoning everything back on Earth. A fraction of the frequencies still work under circumstances you wouldn't understand, I can give you that. Most of our equipment doesn't work very well, if at all, thanks to how fuck up this place's magnetic field is. Anyway, how did this dive go? Any good news or progress? She furthered her explanation and asked with some excitement. An overall disappointment he might be. A reckless idiot that grossly crossed the line of courage to stupidity by a few kilometers he is as well. But as he is very important for the future development and betterment of RDA and Gnostics relationships. a fact Quaritch and Sephiroth both understood as well. Liam on that aspect wasn't much different. He interacted with the natives a lot, something that could be realized by simple deduction, the Olangi or one of the other horse clans she guessed. But Liam was in a fundamentally different situation. First, his interaction with the Nausicaa didn't consist of machine guns, nor did he force them out of their home for metal. The Great Plains were unscathed from any RDA's activities. Nausicaa would hold a different view of anything humans are looking at or from human origin. And not forgetting the most important aspect, it wasn't his war, but one he inevitably will be dragged in, that she was sure of but won't actively push him on that length. Outside of getting bullied, he said jokingly. Opening the microwave, he grabbed the plate and took a bite out of it with a fiberglass spork. This earned an eye roll from Grace. I didn't mention it earlier because I didn't understand shit about the Nausicaa language. It's still the case. But now I noticed their leader, Alictine, and how was she called again? Sahik, with Neytiri and a few others, speak of an individual. It seemed to be a big deal. I think the name was Loschwald or something. Not a clue on what it means though. Also, it apparently is from faraway lands. Jake explained vaguely as he took more bites out of his food that could be compared to flavored digestible plastic. Horrendous pronunciation, and without contact it's hard to tell you further. But it should translate to something along the lines of lone or lost orphan or child. Lost child, it's like this, Grace said, and Jake nodded. Then her eyes slightly widened to ex-marine confusion. She realized that she should have had earlier. It's him. Unless it's a legend I never heard before, which is extremely unlikely, she thought. It both complicated and simplified the situation. The Omadikeya knew of Liam Cram. This title, with the mention of it being from far away and her vast knowledge of Nausicaa culture, zeroed the possibility to only two. Either an unknown and significant legend for the Omadikeya and surrounding clans that now she only learned about, or it was a certain lost human. There were other possibilities. There always are, but extremely high chances where it was Liam, and she will go with that hypothesis unless proven otherwise. This title was appropriate for Liam as well. A human comparable to a child or an orphan, lost and alone. Anyway, she will ask later, but not in less than a dozen hours with how crappy the signal was here. Ultimately, she decided to play dumb while telling a half-truth. Though I must say I have never heard of such an individual with such a title. I would like to hear more about it if you come to hear more of it. My Patreon if you want to give me money and have chapters 1/2 finished in advance. Patreon.com/user U equals 60424165.